You are now listening to Insanity at the Movies. Happy Halloween, dear listener. Or should I say, happy, scream! Man, it's a spooky time of year. Jake and Ben had to listen to that bit of gold twice now because we had a failed recording. And they are applauding. I had to cut it out. I had to do a lot of post work to take out the sound of applause because I didn't want it to be distracting to you, dear listener. But
Ben stood up to applaud and knocked his microphone out of its stand. And
yeah,
we had to replace the microphone. Ended up breaking. So
it was a mess.
It was a mess. But we're talking about a movie that's messy today that contains several messes. One very famous mess that has to be cleaned up, and a movie full of insanity and, oh my goodness, so many things to talk about. We're talking about Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho from 1960, arguably the most influential horror movie of ever. Probably, certainly the most influential horror movie since 1960. I mean, I guess you could go back and argue that Dracula with Bela Lugosi was more influential or something like that. But this one kind of changed everything, as we'll talk about. And it's a classic Hitchcock film. And, well, there's just oodles to say. And you're going to get to hear our scream of consciousness today, dear listener. So get yourself an apple out of the apple bobbin place. What else does get some candy from your bowl and settle in for a dark autumnal night of
some candy corn like Norman Bates.
Yeah, eat some candy corn like Norman Bates.
Like a psychopath.
Yeah, only a mentally broken man with real mommy issues would ever eat candy corn. That is the official Sanity at the Movies take, I think.
Ben's over there munching on his candy corn as we speak.
Yep. That's right.
Also cradling a knife.
Yeah. It's my favorite knife.
Okay. No, just checking. Guys, let me introduce the podcast. This is Sanity at the Movies. Let me introduce the people. We've got Benjamin Skolzer, preacher who's a bleacher of murder scenes because he has to clean them up.
Mm-hmm. Can't I be a creature of murder scenes?
Oh, sure. Yeah. The preacher who's the creature from the Black Lagoon. There we go. And I, of course, am your humble and obedient ghost on this very special Halloween episode. We've also got Jake Menskiller, the pastor who's a master of bleeding, as he is each and every year.
I just bleed
when we come to Halloween. So yeah, we're talking about Psycho and Alfred Hitchcock. What is you guys' experience with this movie and the films of Alfred Hitchcock? And what baggage did you bring to this film, Ben?
I knew it existed. I knew it had a famous shower scene with stabbing like everyone does. And I even knew the twist because my dad always told me about it.
Oh, yeah. Like every day?
Every day. That's all that he talked about.
I just want you to know, Norman and Norma, they're the same. Oh, sorry, listeners. Spoilers for a 80-year-old movie. I mean, it is one of the great twists, I guess. But did you know the twist, Jake?
Yeah, I knew the twist.
Okay, everybody knows the twist. Yeah, pretty famous twist. So continue with your baggage. Ben he told me beforehand, $40,000 worth of baggage he wanted to talk about.
That's
translates into about $400,000 in today's money.
It's pretty good.
It's not bad.
It's not bad. That's all. I mean, I've never been eager to watch it, I guess, because, I don't know. There you go.
Scary.
Yep.
All right,
I
Jake,
do horror movies.
Your baggage.
I think it's the same baggage everybody has with this movie who hasn't seen it, which is know about the shower scene. You've probably seen the shower scene. You've seen the shower scene. It's used in clips all the time. Just any kind of montage of horror movies or October-y commercials is going to have, it's inescapable, unavoidable. And then the music as well. Mm-hmm. And then the references to it all over the culture. So there's that. And the name Norman Bates and Bates Motel and, some of the iconography, the image of the Bates Motel, that sort of thing. Or rather the house. You see the house, you don't see the hotel.
Yeah, the house up on the hill.
Nondescript. That house on the hill.
Yeah.
But I had never actually watched it. And so that was fun. I've seen, I think, my fair share of Hitchcock, but never this one.
Yeah, this is probably, let's see. If you just list the Hitchcock classics, I bet you've seen them, like Vertigo and The Birds. And
I have not seen The Birds.
Oh, okay.
But I've seen, I don't know, North by Northwest, Vertigo. I think both versions of The Man Who Knew Too Much. I don't know. Rear Window. Just there's so many Hitchcock films. I just pulled up a list, and a lot of them, 39 Steps. Even
Sure.
There's just very few that. Well,
I mean, there's so many
there's so many. There's a whole lot that I haven't seen, but I can just scan and oh yeah, I saw that one. Oh yeah, I saw that one. Oh, I saw that one. To Catch a Thief. It just doesn't matter. But yeah, this I would say. I guess the two big back-to-back more horror films are the two that I haven't seen or hadn't seen before now.
Psycho and the Birds.
Yeah.
Birds, really nihilistic. Arguably kind of scarier in its way than Psycho. Well, I don't know. It depends on what gets you.
I wouldn't say so. I saw The Birds a long time ago. I think as a teenager.
As a teenager?
Maybe. Yeah.
That explains why every time a bird flies by, you like dive under the nearest car.
Yeah,
or,
but other than that, it didn't have much of an effect on me. No.
Well, it's got one gore moment that is more intense, with the guy's eyes are pecked out or something that's always really stuck with me, really horrified me as a kid.
Yeah, that's pretty horrifying.
When I say it's more horrifying than Psycho, I guess I just mean it has that one little moment in it that's stuck with me and haunted my nightmares more than anything in Psycho. Would you consider yourself to be a fan of the old master of suspense, Jake?
Yeah, I think he's a lot of fun. I think his movies are a lot of fun, and they're fun both from the standpoint of they hold up and also from just sort of like a craft standpoint. Like you want somebody who's a master of structure and setup and payoff. Like you still can't do much better than Hitchcock. It's by a lot of standards maybe naked or relatively obvious or bare bones, but
I think that's part of the fun, actually. Is
yeah, it really.
You can actually catch him doing something. So if you're a cinephile, especially, you're like, oh, I see what he's doing here, and you can kind of enjoy it.
Yeah, and you can always be in a room with people who are just carried along and don't see what he's doing, and it's fun to get that little bit of. It's like he gifts you a sense of superiority in that sense. So that's kind of cool, without being like I have to hide everything I'm doing from absolutely everybody and have my head up my own butt.
No, Hitchcock was famous for, and then this movie has a moment that a lot of people hate, which is the psychiatrist moment that plays into this. He was famous for wanting to not leave one audience member behind. Like everything has to be explained, every I has to be crossed, every T has to be dotted. Strike that and reverse it. Like everything needs to make sense. We need to know what happened to the money and where it went, even though the money ultimately doesn't matter. Like we don't want any audience member to be ahead of the movie, but we also don't want any audience member to be behind the movie. So he just lays out everything in a linear way that people can follow while doing the most egregious cheats. Like in this movie, you have egregious, I mean, I don't know if you guys figured this out, but by the way, folks, full spoilers for Psycho if you haven't seen it. It wasn't Anthony Perkins playing Mother in any of those. Anytime you see Mother, it's just a lady, which is about as
agreed. That's a cheat.
Which is a cheat, a big cheat.
Until the very end.
Until the very end when he comes out and is revealed. But like the shower scene, like Anthony Perkins had nothing to do with the shooting of the shower scene or with the death of Detective Arbogast or anything like that. But that's not a plot cheat. That's just I don't know what kind of cheat you'd call that, but
it's an effects cheat.
Yeah, it's an effects cheat.
Which, I mean, today they would have the dude, but with makeup and CGI.
Yeah.
And there's a lot more tools in the toolbox to mask that.
Yeah, they did some
Hitchcock
interesting.
would have had to work with.
The other thing they actually did is there's 3 different actors that play the voice of Mother, and he's actually stitching words together. Like it's a very modern thing you could do. Like whenever Mother speaks, you're hearing more than one person. So you're hearing a male, a friend of Anthony Perkins, who was famous for doing an old lady impression that they got to come in, who could kind of have the timbre of a man speaking as a woman. But then you've also got a raspy old woman and I think another woman doing it. And he's choosing little phrases and stitching them together to create the voice of Mother. So good old Mother. The boy's best friend is his mother. This movie has many good life lessons. We all go a little mad sometimes. Ben, what's your relationship with the master of suspense?
Oh, I've seen a lot of Hitchcock, but let's see. I haven't seen Vertigo. So
Really?
Nope, still have not. But seen The Man Who Knew Too Much, the Jimmy Stewart version. Seen the 39 Steps. Seen, is it Saboteur or Sabotage? I don't remember. There's both.
Yeah.
I don't remember which one it is I've seen. It's an older, like, it's a black and white. So
Saboteur is 42.
I think it was Saboteur.
Sabotage was 36. It looks
Oh
like.
man, I'm not sure. I've tried to remember that before. That was a fun movie, whatever it was.
I don't think I've seen that one.
Mm-hmm.
Is the Statue of Liberty in the one that you remember?
No.
Oh, I thought that one was.
So that's Sabotage.
That's okay.
Okay. Yep. Sabotage. Seen Sabotage.
Which one is it where she's married to Cary Grant and he may or may not be a bad
that's,
dude?
Oh, I would have remembered it if you.
Suspicion.
Yeah, I've seen Suspicion. I've seen Notorious. I've seen that other one where Gregory Peck is a crazy guy, except not.
Yeah,
that one stinks.
That one stinks. A lot of people like that one.
I don't know that I like
Spellbound?
I don't think I like Suspicion either. Spellbound.
Well, some of the old ones, like Notorious, are just so hard-edged in their characterizations. Like the heroes are just not likable.
But Notorious
I
is
think
really
it's
cool,
a real.
though. Yeah.
It's a real. I don't know. Eye-opening, enlightening, interesting thing to do to watch. The Man Who Knew Too Much back to back.
Yeah, I've never seen the Peter Lorre version. I've only seen the Jimmy Stewart version.
Yeah, it's. I mean, you just get this sense like, you know, he hit the 50s or whatever, and was just like, okay, well, I've spent the last 30 years learning how to do this, so it's time to actually do it.
Yeah.
And it's not like the Man Who Knew Too Much, the 34 Man Who Knew Too Much or 39 Steps are bad movies. It's just that he felt, it just seems like he felt like he hit a stride. And
yeah, the 50s is definitely his golden period where he has all the money and all the power and he can do exactly what he wants and no one's stopping him. And the censors are relaxed enough that he can kind of do.
And so it's just like, I mean, okay, Foreign Correspondence, 1940. So that's a pretty well-respected classic. But yeah, you see the difference. You see all the different little things that he does in those two movies. And it's like, all right, he really felt like he could, once you hit the 50s or mid-50s, early mid-50s, he's just doing what he wants to do now.
Yeah.
And has control over has mastery of can achieve what he sets out to do much more readily.
Yeah. I mean, Hitchcock is the great exemplar of auteur theory, the idea that the director is the author and that we are watching one man's ideas and one man's obsessions up there on screen, as opposed to the more mundane idea that a bunch of people get together and make a movie. But when you're watching a Hitchcock movie, especially a later period Hitchcock, you're seeing the things that scare him, the things that he thinks are interesting, the things that he thinks are funny, the story that he wants to tell. I mean, in Psycho, Hitchcock hated policemen. So you have this scene that, yes, it plays to Marion's paranoia and all this stuff, but I don't think it was like that in the screenplay. I think Hitchcock was like, no, we got to dehumanize this policeman character a little bit because he was scared to death of policemen. He never in his life learned to drive a car because he was afraid of being pulled over. So there's just things like that you can track across Hitchcock's canon of work, and you can see you can tell which actors he likes in this movie. You can tell that he had a good relationship with Janet Leigh and with Anthony Perkins. You can tell that he didn't care at all about the lady that plays Lila Crane, who he was mad at during the shooting, actually, and doing everything to make her part dowdy and stupid and unlikable, even though it almost works against the movie, I would say. Although maybe you could argue for it. Maybe you guys would want to argue for it. I don't know. But Sam and Lila are such zeros in the second half of this movie that it's striking after all the attention lavished on Marion. In any case, Hitchcock is he's a fun director to watch because he's got identifiable themes that you see across his body of work. And there's always a bad mother. I mean, I don't know how many bad mothers have shown up. Claude Rains has an evil Nazi mother in Notorious. The mom in Strangers on the Train, where the two guys trade murders. One of them wants his mom murdered because she's oppressive. I don't know what Hitchcock's relationship with his mother was like. I don't think it was bad in any way that's come down to us, but man, he had some kind of a something about mothers. Anyway, I like Hitchcock, as you can probably tell. I mean, I don't know if he's like my favorite or anything. He's fun. Like he's fun to watch. Like exactly what Jake said. Like he does things that you can watch and appreciate on a very obvious and visceral level. And he's also got fun suspense stories. Like he's the kind of old classic movie that's very easy to talk your wife into watching.
Yeah.
Or
well, he's going to cast, Jimmy Stewart, or he's going to cast Cary Grant. And it's going to be fun. It's going to be cool. It's going to be an enjoyable classic movie experience, just on a superficial level.
There'll be some glamour.
But there are multiple levels that you can enjoy it on.
Right. Yeah. I mean, and Psycho doesn't necessarily fit all of this, but usually there'll be glamour and there'll be some sex appeal and there will be some stars of the period that we like. And it's just everything that you watch an old Hollywood movie for on a superficial level.
Yeah. Oh, I like Jimmy Stewart because I like It's a Wonderful Life, but I've never really seen him in anything else.
Right.
Oh, he's Rear Window. Let's do that.
Right. And that movie is supposed to be like he's a voyeur watching people in his crappy apartment and all this stuff, but then like half of it's like him having like banter with Grace Kelly, and she's like the height of coiffed, perfected elegance.
So it's like, I get to experience Jimmy Stewart outside of It's a Wonderful Life and Grace Kelly.
Yeah.
I know that name. Like, and yeah, she's got all of the Grace Kelly that what's her face in Mad Men was trying to.
Yeah, I mean, Grace Kelly was the
June.
Mrs. Draper.
Yeah,
whatever that actress's name is, January Jones.
January Jones.
Yes. So we're all Hitchcock fans, I guess.
Yeah,
to one degree or another.
Yeah, you always feel like he's playing games with you as a viewer in terms of like the abstract themes, or not so abstract.
Yeah.
Have you seen any of his silent films?
Like the sex that he actually cares about.
I mean, he's one of those directors that made that transition.
Goes all the way back.
Goes back to silent film, right? He's got a whole silent oeuvre.
I mean, a lot of it is him finding his feet. So there's stuff that's interesting historically, but not necessarily all that much fun to watch. I've seen some of his very early talkies. Like I think I've seen The Lodger, but most people agree he doesn't really hit his stride.
The Lodger is silent.
Is it okay? Well, maybe I've seen at least part of that.
I just have it pulled up in front of me. That's 1927.
Okay. Yeah. Most people would say he hits his stride with, what's the one where the lady, it's not Strangers on a Train, but it's also a train.
The Lady Vanishes.
The Lady Vanishes.
Which I've never seen.
Yeah. And then around that time, he does a bunch of British classics like 39 Steps, The Original Man Who Knew Too Much. And then he goes to America. He has these different periods. He goes to America and he does Rebecca and Spellbound, which are their own glamorous, big budget Hollywood kind of super productions of the time, which have their problems. And Notorious is another one of those, which have their problems because Hitchcock didn't have full creative control. He was always fighting with David Selznick, the producer. So it's kind of not exactly his vision. But a lot of people would say that's some of Hitchcock's best stuff. And then you've got his 1950s golden period when he was shooting these lavish Technicolor things, and finally culminates with Psycho is kind of the end of that period. And then I think, although The Birds was successful and everybody still loves The Birds, the culture kind of got ahead of Hitchcock, especially, I mean, it's his own fault for making Psycho. Once you've opened up that Pandora's box, then it's like, well, okay, everybody can make things that are more bloody, that are more deviant. And it's like Hitchcock was kind of old news after that. He couldn't keep up with once you started having the actual horror movies of the 70s and stuff like that. And his last couple movies, like Frenzy, are pretty tawdry in their attempt to kind of disappointingly tawdry. Not that the tawdriness is always there with Hitchcock, but I think we all love the elegance of the older movies where the tawdriness has to be kind of subtext one way or another.
I've seen Torn Curtain, which is an older movie after The Birds of '66 with Steve McQueen.
I think I've seen that one.
It's an okay, like it's basically just works as a kind of action adventure in its way. I mean, still you got Hitchcock, the Hitchcock of it all, but it's pretty light.
Yeah.
His usual flavor is not heavily sprinkled on the movie. It's just like an espionage thriller with Steve McQueen. It has a famous fight scene where Steve McQueen and this other lady wherever he is force this assassin's head into a stove.
Oh no!
Until he dies.
That'll get somebody.
They got him.
Okay, good. He deserved it, I guess.
Yep.
All right. Well,
so there's your Hitchcock.
There's your Hitchcock. Well, let me.
I said Steve McQueen. I'm sorry, Paul Newman.
Okay, yeah.
Paul Newman.
And then there's one with young Connery from around that time. I forget what it's called. Marnie. I think Marnie has.
Yeah.
Young Connery.
Never saw it.
Yeah, those post kind of Psycho and the Birds movies are interesting. Frenzy is the one I think of that's just like, oh no, Hitchcock's trying to be relevant in a world that has nudity and violence and stuff. And this just feels really dark and ugly. I mean, there's still some elegance to Psycho. I think Psycho and the Birds are the last of the, like, we still have to have some elegance to this. I don't know. Let me take us back and give us a little context. So I hate true crime podcasts. I'm not a fan of the whole genre of true crime docudrama. We take a real life story of someone's miserable pain and turn it into entertainment. Not a huge fan of. I suppose there are things that transcend the genre, like Truman Capote's In Cold Blood or any number of things you could name. But I think basically when you see at the supermarket all these books about this stupid Jeffrey Dahmer show that Netflix just came out with, like,
Yeah. Didn't you read a whole book on the Manson family?
Yeah, I've read both classic Manson books. I've read Helter Skelter. Maybe I wouldn't read it now. I mean, that was 20 years ago probably that I read that book. And then I read a different book that is actually trying to dispute that book that you can listen to us talk about on some episode of Sound of Sanity, where we talked about where the guy's drawing connections between the Manson family and the CIA. And it's not, it does cover the Tate LaBianca murders, but it's not about them. It's just about the world that they happened in. So anyway, I don't like true crime. That's all of which to say, this is the closest we'll ever become a true crime podcast, because you had to talk a little bit about the inspiration for Psycho. Ed Gein, the Plainfield Butcher. But actually, let me take a step back before we even get to that and talk about another serial killer, H.H. Holmes, the first documented serial killer in the United States of America. 1888, you had Jack the Ripper over in England. Certainly not the first person to go and kill a bunch of people for pleasure, but the first person to sort of capture the public imagination in the age of the newspaper. Mm-hmm. And H.H. Holmes was the first guy like that in America, in the United States of America. And in 1894, thereabouts, in the Chicagoland area, H.H. Holmes was concocting his latest dastardly scheme. And it went a little something like this. He had a buddy, a carpenter friend named Benjamin Pitzel. And he said, "Hey, Ben, you know what? Why don't we fake your death?" And Benjamin Pitzel was like, "Okay, yeah, we can fake my death. How are we going to do that?" "Well, we're going to set you up as a scientist." See, this is a really great plan. We're going to set you up as a scientist, and then we're going to have your lab explode. And Benjamin Pitzel's like, "Okay, cool. So equals profit how?" And H.H. Holmes is like, "It's an insurance scam, my old friend. We're going to find a cadaver. Don't worry. I'll find the cadaver. Don't worry about it. And we will burn it beyond recognition in the explosion of your laboratory, and we will claim that it is you, and we'll make lots of money from the insurance company." And Pitzel, who had gone in on dastardly schemes with the vile H.H. Holmes before, agreed to the plan. Unfortunately, H.H. Holmes had trouble finding a cadaver. And so he decided, well, there's one cadaver that I have pretty readily available. I mean, I'm going to have to make it into a cadaver, but there's one pre-cadaver that I have available. It's Benjamin Pitzel, my friend, who I came up with this scheme. Actually, if we're going to present somebody who's supposed to be his corpse, why not just present his corpse? So he burned and chloroformed his friend, quote unquote, Pitzel, and presented the body to the police, to the insurance company, and made a lot of money. Now, that is not the interesting part of the story. That is not the shocking, sad, horrifying part of the story. Here's the really spooky, scary, horrifying part of the story. What H.H. Holmes did next. H.H. Holmes then went to Mrs. Pitzel, Benjamin Pitzel's wife, and he said, "Hey, I'm going on a trip, and I wonder if I could take your daughters, Alice, Nellie, and Howard, your little baby son, 3 of your children, to accompany me." And Mrs. Pitzel, here's the crazy part. Mrs. Pitzel said, "Sure, that sounds great." She obviously did not realize that H.H. Holmes was the murderer of her husband, but she was just like, "Yeah, sure, you can take my daughters and go on a trip around the country with them." And so H.H. Holmes left with the children, and that was the last that Mrs. Pitzel ever saw of those children. We don't have to talk about that. But here's the point. Eric Larson wrote a great book called Devil in the White City, which talks about the Chicago World's Fair of that time and the serial killer H.H. Holmes plying his bloody trade, and kind of puts them together in a really interesting way. And the case that he makes is that people back then, like I said, it's not that there weren't serial murderers. It's not that there weren't killers. It's not that nobody had ever heard or conceived of the idea of someone who just liked killing people. Mm-hmm. But it wasn't really a category that people thought in. It wasn't really a category that people thought in. Just in the same way that in recent decades, a lot of literature and publicity has surrounded sexual abuse. And so we all think in categories of sexual abuser, child molester, stranger danger. These are all, it's not that people didn't realize strangers could be dangerous before that, but they just didn't have an easy handle for it the way that we have now. Mm-hmm. I am so trained by the way that people talk about these things that I think in the category of, well, that person might be a predator against my child. That person might be a predator against my child. Here's the steps that I take to make sure that there's no predator against my child. But it's not always been that way. People haven't always had those easy handles. And serial killer, by and large, was not a handle that people had. And so the case that Eric Larson makes in his book about H.H. Holmes is that we can go a little bit easy on Mrs. Pittisell. You know, it's easy to look down on her when she like let her daughters go away with this diabolical murderer who had killed her husband, in fact. And even if she didn't know he killed her husband, why let your daughters go with somebody? It's like, well, the thing is, people didn't have categories for the kind of evil that H.H. Holmes did in their heads. Not in the same way that we do today. And so why do we have those categories? Well, some of it is because of Jack the Ripper. Some of it is because of H.H. Holmes. But the real golden age of serial killers begins with the inspiration behind Psycho, behind the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, behind all the stories, all the slasher movies. And that gentleman's name is Ed Gein. So flash forward to 1957. Wisconsin farmer Ed Gein is arrested on suspicion of the murder of one Bernice Worden. His farmhouse is duly checked, and the remains of approximately 15 women are found in various small pieces. Ed Gein, interesting guy. He was dominated by his mother, Augusta, who was some kind of nutty faux Lutheran religious lady. She'd read him these really selective verses from Revelation and from the Old Testament, emphasizing God's wrath and sin and depravity. She taught him that women are all just promiscuous whores. The only person that you can really trust is your mother. And he lived on a farm, kind of isolated from the rest of town, the town of Plainfield, with her father, or with his father and with his brother, until both his father and his brother died. And then Ed is just left alone, caring for his awful, miserable, mean shrew of a mother. And she has a stroke, and shows she's just like this miserable creature that he has to take care of, this ugly thing. And she has been ugly to him for his entire life. But finally, she dies, and Ed is left alone. And he does handyman jobs. He babysits around the town. People know him. People like him. They think he's a little odd. They think he has kind of a strange sense of humor. But they never suspect what he's actually up to. November 16th, 1957, Bernice Worden disappears from the store that she owns. And the last person to be seen at that store is Ed Gein. So the police go ahead and arrest him. Mm-hmm. And they check his farm, like I said at the beginning of this beautiful, beautiful story. So they find her body, and they go ahead and they do a search of the house. They found whole human bones, different items, a waste basket made out of human remains, chairs, leggings, mask, a belt, a lampshade. And so he killed 2 women, including Bernice Worden, the owner of the store. But he also dug up a lot of graves, and he might have been responsible for more murders. Who knows? Sad, sordid, miserable story of Ed Gein. He spent the rest of his life in a hospital for the mentally insane. And he is really the first American serial killer of the modern era. So you have Jack the Ripper in London over in 1888, who captures the public imagination and continues to capture it to this day. Then you have H.H. Holmes, who's kind of the first American guy to have that kind of wonderful legacy. And then you have Ed Gein in 1957, who the newspapers at the time can't report half of what he's done and what he's responsible for, because people just wouldn't have been able to handle it. They didn't, like I said, people didn't have this, the categories for this. I mean, the phrase serial killer first becomes popular in 1981. I'm about as old as the phrase serial killer. It's not an old category. But Ed Gein is 1957. And then serial killing begins to become a very popular sport in the 1970s. 1970s, 1980s are considered the golden age of a serial killer. I did not name them this. This is what they're called by serial killer aficionados. And people have different reasons for that. There's the sexual revolution in the 1960s. Of course, there's urbanization, more people packed together, living in closed spaces. There's a lot of things that people talk about. And I don't know that we need to litigate that today. But the point is, a lot of what you think of when you think of a serial killer, a lot of the iconography that's kind of come down to us and that has been repeated ad nauseum in TV shows and movies, and Thomas Harris with the Hannibal Lecter stuff was kind of playing on this same stuff, comes to us from Ed Gein. He's the seemingly normal dude that has a devil inside him, a monster lurking beneath a placid exterior. He's the guy that's just across from the white picket fence, acting normal. He's your neighbor. He's your friend. He's somebody that you see every day, but he's harboring a dark secret. And when they pry it open, pry it loose, when they go into his domain, it is a hellscape of debauchery and ruination and violation. And he, especially through pop culture, through movies like Psycho, I think he really helped shift the culture away from any kind of fascination with the supernatural in terms of what we're scared of. What scares us today are real life horrors. What scares us are school shooters and serial killers and the kind of terrible things that happen in a concrete material world. Of course, there's still many popular ghost movies and stuff like that. But by and large, as a culture, I wouldn't say we're really super scared of the supernatural. What we are scared of is the horrible things that can happen inside the seemingly normal human mind and the horrible things that human beings can do to each other. We're not scared of Dracula. We're not scared of Gothic castles. We're not scared of supernatural evil. We are scared of what our neighbor is capable of. We are scared of what the guy that we wave to every day as he goes to work across the street is capable of. We're scared maybe of what we're capable of. And that's the legacy of Ed Gein. That's the legacy of Psycho. And just living not that many miles away from Edward Gein was a guy named Robert Bloch, who wrote the novel Psycho. He was a protege of H.P. Lovecraft. H.P. Lovecraft was the first person to encourage Bloch, like, hey, you've got something. And so a lot of his early stories are like about cosmic horror and Cthulhu kind of stuff. He would submit stories and novels and things to the little things like places like Weird Tales, those kinds of things. And post World War II, Robert Bloch had a realization, which is that, wow, horror really isn't like what lurks in the shadows of castles. It's what lurks in the shadows of our mind. And so he wrote the novel of Psycho, more or less explicitly based on this real life murder story of Ed Gein. Norman in the book, much more like Ed Gein. He's fat, he's slobby, he's unkempt, he's a drunk. The whole scene where he's peeping through the hole is much more icky. Not that it's not terribly icky in the movie, but it's just a little different when it's sweet, childish, handsome Anthony Perkins. But the thing that absolutely fascinated Robert Bloch about the whole Ed Gein case, and the thing that he understood would be fascinating to all of us, was the idea that this guy could just be your neighbor. He could be your friend. He could be somebody across the white picket fence from you who was just somebody that you knew that this kind of evil could lurk hidden, or maybe not so hidden, in regular society. People always kind of think, or I've heard people criticize Psycho because how could Norman get away with all this in a little hotel that's like right out off this stupid small town? Like, why didn't people figure it out? Like, mother's sitting there propped in the window. But I think that reads perfectly on a sort of creepy psychological level. We all understand that people get away with things all the time, and it's right under the nose of everyone, and people just, they don't want to see. They don't want to see. So these things happen. So Robert Bloch's big quote was, "Here was a town where a person sneezed on one side of the town, and on the other side of the town, someone said, 'Good Gesundheit.' And yet evil flourished there." And he found that really fascinating and wanted to capture that. Robert Bloch, just to finish up his story, he wrote for Alfred Hitchcock Presents, he wrote for Thriller, he wrote for Star Trek. He's kind of responsible, one of the workman-like people that did a lot of the pop culture that we know from the mid 20th century. He's very dad jokey. I've not read the novel Psycho, but I've read his short stories, and they're like full of puns. The famous scene where Marion is killed in the novel says something like, "A knife came through the shower curtain and cut off her scream, and then it cut off her head." He's like a Mr. Dark pun dude. So I don't find him very fun to read for that reason. But that's Ed Gein. That's Robert Bloch. Let's talk about Alfred Hitchcock. He's the son of a grocer in London. His father and mother said he was a lamb without a spot. He really didn't have any dark past, at least that we know of. The most famous formative story, the anecdote that Hitchcock would always tell over and over again, was that one day he did something bad. Hitchcock didn't even remember what, but his dad took him to jail or sent him to jail with a note, and he handed the note to a constable, and the note said, "Put Alfred in jail so he can see what it's like," just as a little act of discipline from his dad. So the policeman marched him to the cell. The policeman put him into the cell. And the policeman said, "This is what we do to naughty boys." I don't know if he talked like that, but that's what he said. "This is what we do to naughty boys." Turn the key. Poor little Alfred had to sit in there for a few minutes. And that was a formative experience.
You don't say.
And you can see it reflected in this movie, in the famous and quite creepy and somewhat superfluous to anything else cop scene where the cop is just so scary.
Yeah.
But he's a very mechanical-minded guy. He studies mechanics, electricity, acoustics, and navigation in London. And then he's looking for a job, trying to figure out what he's going to do. And famous players, Lasky, the production arm of Paramount Pictures in London, is opening a studio. And Alfred Hitchcock, because he's just a good mechanical draftsman type dude, gets a job drawing subtitles for silent films that were being made in the early 20th century there. And that's where he met his wife, Alma, who was an editor. And he worked his way up, I dare say, to become a director in the British film industry. And then the rest is history. We've already talked about the trajectory of his career. Like he took off. He was good at branding. And some of the reason that like your mom knows who Hitchcock is not because he's so darn great that she knows who it is. It's because he had a TV show and he appeared on the TV show and he had that famous silhouette and he put his name all over magazines. I mean, you guys have probably seen books that are like Alfred Hitchcock presents the top.
Yeah, I have a Alfred Hitchcock presents Stories to Keep Awake By or something like that.
Right. And Alfred Hitchcock can't present nothing about that. Like,
it's just his name, his brand.
Can we write you a check and put your name on this? There was Alfred Hitchcock magazine. There was a TV show. He was just a really canny self-promoter. I mean, he was like the first of this breed of like Chris Pratt or The Rock or Tom Cruise.
Walt Disney.
Walt Disney is maybe the ultimate. Yeah, Walt Disney knew how to brand himself to children. But Alfred Hitchcock branded himself as like, he's the suspense guy. But it also helps that he was really, really, really very good at what he did. He was a fastidious solver of problems. He did not care about people. He did not care about his actors. He was accused of saying that actors were like cattle. And he said in a famous interview, "I never said that actors were cattle. I said they should be treated like cattle." Didn't get along with actors because his idea was, "I've already storyboarded this thing. You figure out the motivation. I'm just going to come up with a place for you to stand. You've got to hit that mark. You've got to stand there. You figure out how to make it plausible that you'd stand there. I'm doing the camera. You're doing the acting stuff." And so people like Janet Leigh can do really well in that. Like she brings a lot of pathos to Marion. People like Anthony Perkins brings a lot to Norman Bates. And you have to imagine Hitchcock had something to do with that. Like I'm sure the legends aren't, he did not care. You can't not care and get these kinds of results. But the story is Anthony Perkins came up with the candy corn thing. Hey, what if Norman chews candy corn when he's nervous? And Hitchcock's like, okay, whatever you want to do. Is he going to be chewing that candy corn in the shot that I designed? And you'll be standing in the right place. And it's like, okay. He famously said, once the screenplay is finished, I'd just as soon not make the film at all. All the fun is over. I have a strongly visual mind. I visualize a picture right down to the final cuts. I write all this out in the greatest detail in the script, and then I don't look at the script when I'm shooting. I know it by heart, just as an orchestra conductor needs not look at the score. It's melancholy to shoot a picture. When you finish the script, the film is perfect, but in shooting it, you lose perhaps 40% of your original conception. So that's Alfred Hitchcock. I mean, that's the legend. That's what he wanted you people to think. You get a lot of different reports from his actors. Some people really liked him. He was the kind of guy, I think, if his light was shining on you, you really liked him. And then once he decided he didn't like you, you were toast. He really liked Janet Leigh in this movie, and he really did not like Vera Mills. He was grooming, and I do mean grooming, Vera Mills for the part in Vertigo. She was his star. He was paying for her to have these glamour photographs, and he was making her into his next Ice Queen Hitchcock leading lady. And then she got pregnant with her third child and was unable to do Vertigo, and Hitchcock was furious. And so he still owned her contract, and he puts her in Psycho, and he gives her the least glamorous, most dowdy, kind of like nothing part as the, I think, fairly unlikable Lila Crane. And apparently there was more between Lila and Sam, and like more stuff for them to do, but it just all got cut out because, and she's wearing a stupid wig, and like it's just like you can tell he likes the people. Hitchcock likes working with the people in the first half of this movie, and he really doesn't like working with the people in the second half of this movie. He didn't like Vera Mills, who plays Lila. He didn't like the stiff as a board guy that plays Sam. I think he likes Detective Arbogast.
Oh yeah.
Which
I thought he liked the sheriff and his wife.
Yeah, I think he likes those people as characters. I think basically he just doesn't like the two leads. Because the screenwriter talks about like, I tried to give them stuff, like this still needs to be a story, and Hitchcock's like, no, the story, it's Norman's story. It doesn't matter. Let's just hit the beats as quickly as possible and make the set pieces cool. And I don't know, we could talk about whether we think that was a good idea or not. Maybe that is the way to do it. But things that make Hitchcock great, things that he's famous for. The two things that were big when he was getting into silent film that he was influenced by were German Expressionism, which is, everybody knows German Expressionism. It's Nosferatu, it's Metropolis, it's these bigger than life things where you distort reality in order to express an emotional state. Like, this person's sad, so the whole set is going to be looming over them in a gothic way to show the despair of their soul, or it's that kind of thing. It's a high art movement in Germany, but it was really influential in the 20s and early teens when Hitchcock was coming up. And then Soviet montage theory, Eisenstein, and those kinds of things where you it's not about the individual frame of film or the individual camera setup. It's about putting them all together. The famous Kuleshov experiment, where you take the same, we've talked about it before, where you take the same image of a dude just looking into the camera, and then you cut it together with a little girl picking flowers, and it looks like he's really affectionate, and you cut it together with an image of a dead cat or something, and it looks like he's disgusted. It's like we're achieving meaning through montage. So Hitchcock's very ahead of his time in adopting both those things. Like, we're going to distort reality to sell an emotional idea, which you might not catch him. You might not think of Psycho as being that way, but The Cop is a good example. Like, yep. Who is this cop? he's like Terminator or something. Like, it's completely in Marion's head who this cop is.
That's right.
He does not exist as an actual human that you or I would meet, even in the world of the movie.
Yeah, the only way he makes sense is as from her perspective, which is distorted.
Right.
Which you can catch. What's interesting is that a few times you were like, wait a minute, this cop's just a regular guy. Like, he's actually trustworthy.
Yeah.
Because the screenplay doesn't, I don't know.
Yeah, he's not actually doing anything wrong, but it all has such sinister
Well, you've got
foreboding.
you've got the music, you've got her fear, you've got his creepy sunglasses,
Right,
which
and the
he never
shot
takes off
from under, with him looming into the camera, you know, as if from
like
her,
a bug or something.
Yeah. It's really striking. And then, of course, the famous example of Soviet montage theory of putting images together to achieve an effect would be the shower scene. Yeah, which famously Hitchcock always said, never showed nudity and never showed a knife going in. Both things are false, but Hitchcock loved the idea that you didn't actually see anything. And it's basically true. Like, you don't see much. There might be 1 3-second shot of a knife that's actually going into something, but basically you're just cutting together a bunch of shots of a knife being swung and her hands and her screaming face and the water and all this stuff. And it creates an effect that even these many years later, I think is pretty powerful and horrible. Other things to look for in Hitchcock. He is all about gaze. He is all about shot of human face and then point of view of what that person is looking at, which
Gaze.
Gaze, yes, Gaze. He's also maybe a little about gaze, Gays. But human gaze, point of view, which Spielberg famously has co-opted and made his thing. Let's have the slow zoom in on Richard Dreyfuss, and then we'll see the magical alien spacecraft. You know, is that kind of thing, which not every filmmaker does. You can watch plenty of movies where the camera exists outside the point of view of the characters. Good movies. But Hitchcock and Spielberg are all about giving you that subjective lens into what's going on. He is all about the compression and elongation of time. So if something suspenseful is about to happen, we stretch it out more than it really would be. We can basically stop time. We're not about, again, being literal about how long something would take. If Detective Arbogast needs to stumble down those stairs really slowly so that we can get the effect of a man like, we'll do that. And then Mother will be right there. Somehow she's right there to stab him. Like, we're cheating. You don't catch it. You wouldn't say the movie's cheating, but he's doing all kinds of things cinematically to achieve the effect that he wants without much thought of what would literally be true in that scene. Hitchcock was a proponent finally of what he called pure cinema. He wasn't interested ultimately in dialogue. He wasn't interested in character. He was just interested in what he could do with a camera and with sounds to move you. You know, it's not about having a character sum up the tragedy of Marion Crane's life being cut short. It's about cutting from her eye to a drain as her life goes down the drain. Like, it's about creating an effect that you can't put into words. Like, you can't conjure up the sad, wasted life of Marion Crane with words, but you feel it as the breath goes out of her and as the eyeballs cut with the drain and the water's still going. And it's right there, man. Life goes on, but it's all washing down the drain before you know it, man. That kind of, those are the kinds of effects Hitchcock was after. I'll talk about 2 more people. Bernard Herrmann is the great composer of this movie. Pretty famous score. I don't know if you guys noticed that.
No,
but what?
People, those rant. Strings have been used for a couple of things. Was that in this movie? Yeah, it was. I don't know. Famous for Citizen Kane. Famous for working with Hitchcock on Psycho, Vertigo, North by Northwest, The Man Who Knew Too Much, all kinds of stuff. Bernard Herrmann was a fan of ostinato, which is a short repeated motif of a few notes, if you can imagine that. The difference between Bernard Herrmann and a lot of classic film composers, including people like, say, John Williams, is that John Williams is going to write like a big melody and a fanfare. Here's the Indiana Jones theme. And you can certainly pick out discernible themes in a Bernard Herrmann score, but what Bernard Herrmann's really good at and interested in is creating a texture, a mood, a feeling of, you don't walk away humming Psycho. There's nothing to hum really, but you certainly do feel it in your bones and it sticks with you. No pun intended. You talk for just a second about Anthony Perkins. I don't know. I think we do know that he was gay. He was cagey about that for most of his life, but I think he actually died of HIV. So I think it came out around then. He was also mishandled, as he put it, by his mother, sexually abused in some way. And he actually made his Broadway debut in a play called Tea and Sympathy, which is about an effeminate man who's mocked at the school that he goes to. And then a woman has to they have to find the right woman to cure him of his effeminacy and help him not be gay anymore. So it's a really early and really politically incorrect by today's standards look at those kinds of things. But Tony Perkins is the guy that you get for that kind of thing. He plays like these effeminate, longing kind of characters really well. He got so tired of being gay that he actually married a woman and turned to like shock therapy and conversion therapy stuff to try to beat it. And it's really interesting to try and get through the weeds on that, because obviously anything that you read is written from the perspective of somebody that's saying shock therapy bad, conversion therapy bad. Obviously, if Tony Perkins had just been able to flower as the gay man that he wanted to be, then everything would be wonderful. But apparently he was pretty tormented by it and wanted to change, but not in time not to die of HIV. So really, I mean, the only guy that could play this character, born to play Norman Bates and lived to see that become his legacy. Like, he did do other interesting things, but everybody knows him as Norman Bates. I mean, he just got typecast, and he eventually made his peace with it and did some Psycho sequels and stuff like that. But he resented it for a long time, as you would if everybody just expected Norman Bates. Very shy, sensitive, likable guy. Sounds like he was pretty much the guy that you see in Norman's more likable moments. But just one of those perfect sort of, you couldn't, how do you cast this? So 1959, Hitchcock is trying to figure out what his next project is. Hitchcock had trouble figuring out what his next project is because he always wanted to be a step ahead of the audience. He always wanted to do something different and something exciting. And so it was just so hard for him to find material, because he wanted to find material that would be exciting for him. And Hitchcock has a problem in the 50s going into the 60s, which is that the French have outdone him with a famous suspense movie called Diabolique, which people may have heard of. And all these cheapy film producers like Roger Corman are doing like their Edgar Allan Poe movies and stuff, and making waves doing these really low budget suspense horror movies that audiences love. So it's like, here's Hitchcock. He's the master. He makes these things for millions of dollars. He makes these giant productions. But then there's these other guys that are making cheapo movies that are doing just as well as he is because they've got provocative content. So Hitchcock has to solve this problem. He has to find a way to stay relevant. And one of his assistants, who's out there culling for material, finds Psycho, gives it to him. He loves it. He immediately sees the potential in it. Nobody wants to get on board with it. They all just think it's the tawdry trash. I think it basically is a tawdry trash, and they don't want to do it. They're just like, what are you talking about? So Hitchcock agrees to make the movie in black and white for under $1 million, using the TV crew that worked on Alfred Hitchcock Presents. So he did it for super cheap. He didn't hire any big stars. I mean, Janet Leigh was a pretty big star, but no Cary Grant. They wouldn't have been able to afford Cary Grant or anybody like that for this movie. And he did it with his television crew in black and white. I mean, he also thought it would be too gory and like, we're not going to get away with it.
Yeah.
In color.
Yeah. I mean, that's been my assumption, was we can't get away with this in color in a way that we can in black and white. And so dress it up however we want. That's a prime factor. Yeah.
And Hitchcock was very canny about that kind of thing. He played the audience like a violin, but he also played the censor board like a violin. And there are some hilarious stories of, he submitted the shower scene. The censors said, we saw nudity. We saw violence. And so Hitchcock's like, okay, I'll cut it and I'll resubmit it. And then he submits the exact same thing. He doesn't change a frame. And this time, the 3 people who thought they saw something are like, we didn't see anything. And the 2 people who didn't see anything are like, we saw something. And I think he submitted it a 3rd time and just got it through. Never changed a scrap of it. They wanted him to change the opening scene in the bedroom in the hotel room with Sam and Marion. And he said, okay, look, I'm going to set a day. You guys send somebody. You can tell me what's acceptable. I don't want to shoot anything that we can't use. You just come and send somebody and he'll tell me what's acceptable and we'll figure it out. And nobody shows up on that day. And so he just submits the movie as is. His assistants described him as like gleeful in the way, like, he's like, yes, I get to go another round with the censor board. I'm going to get him. And yeah, the screenwriter intentionally write things that were never intended to be part of the final cut, but that we can use as bargaining chips.
It's a classic book writing technique.
Yeah.
You put things in to have them cut so that you can
save the thing you're actually...
Yeah, and justify the... Yeah.
And Joseph Stefano was a young screenwriter that he worked with. Stefano got the job by saying, here is my conception for this movie, Mr. Hitchcock. What if, instead of spending 2 chapters on Marion Crane, the whole opening third of the movie is just Marion Crane, and we really sell her story to the audience? And Hitchcock loved that. He thought that was such a fun idea to... Hitchcock, I have a quote here. You have to remember that this is Hitchcock. You have to remember that Psycho is a film made with quite a sense of amusement on my part. To me, it's a fun picture. The processes through which we take the audience, you see, it's rather like taking them through the haunted house at the fairground. So he just really, really cuddled up to the idea that we'd really sell a real Marion Crane story that people would really be invested in, and then we would take that away from them.
Put it in the bottom of the swamp.
Put it in the bottom of the swamp with the money. None of it mattered. He just thought that was so fun. And he said, Joseph, if we do that, what we can do is we can cast a star. We're going to get a star. And Janet Leigh, of course, was a star. Not a top-tier star, but she was a star. And she wanted to work with Hitchcock. She didn't even read the script, I think. She came and did the thing that's on her tombstone. I think she worked for 3 weeks. 1 week on the shower, 2 weeks on the other stuff. And nobody remembers anything else.
Bye-bye, Birdie.
Yeah, bye-bye, Birdie. I mean, I like Janet Leigh. She's in good stuff, but she's usually doing like romantic comedy kind of fluff.
The existence of Jamie Lee Curtis.
Yes. Yeah, we have her for that. Have her to thank for that. And she does look a whole heck of a lot like Jamie Lee Curtis in this movie. I was noticing. As I said before, Hitchcock had Vera Miles under contract. He had groomed her for Vertigo. She had angered him by getting pregnant. He told her, you should only have 2. And she said, well, Mr. Hitchcock, you got your movie, but I got a son, and I'm happy with that bargain. And Hitchcock never forgave her, and I think intentionally sabotaged her by putting her in a bad role. And a lot has come out in the Me Too era about Hitchcock's relationship with these leading ladies who he would put under exclusive contract and groom up. I don't think he had any kind of actual sexual relations with them, but he was a weird, obsessive guy that liked to have young ladies under his thumb. He was not a nice man. He is what I think you'd expect him to be based on his movies. He has those obsessions. He has that sense of naughty, deviant sexuality or whatever. I think we're very blessed that Hitchcock lived in the time he did and had the censors that he had, because I think if he'd been able to just spill his id on the screen the way modern directors do, I don't know if his movies would actually be appropriate to watch. But luckily, he had to work within the confines of his time and find a way to make things work. He had a lot of fun keeping the movie a secret. He actually spread word that they were looking for an actress to play Anthony Perkins' mother. And so famous actresses, older actresses of the time who were always hungry for a good role, were like sending in their resume to try and get the role of Mrs. Bates. And he did the famous thing where he sealed off the set. There were guards at the entrances. People were not supposed to get in. There were no publicity photos. Janet Leigh and Tony Perkins did not go and do the talk show rounds. The only advertising was, we're not going to advertise it because we don't want you to know the dark secrets of this movie. So we're not going to tell you anything. We're not even sending our stars to do publicity rounds because we don't want them to reveal anything. And no one will be admitted to the movie after it started. And it worked like gangbusters. Everybody wanted to find out what the big secrets of the movie were. Psycho was huge, made a lot of money. Arguably Hitchcock's certainly best remembered movie, most influential movie. I think it really did move the culture, for better or worse, towards away from fear of supernatural evil and towards the fear of psychological evil or just bodily harm. And that is by and large where people are today. I mean, we still have ghost movies and ghost stories, but really the whole genre of horror is more this kind of thing. And this is what really scares people. It's not what really scares me. I find supernatural evil in movies and stories to be much more scary than the Norman Bates brand.
I do too.
It's like, even if somebody broke into my house and tried to stab me to death, like, okay, it would hurt. It would really hurt. I don't want to die that way, but it doesn't scare me the way that thinking, oh, there's a ghost in my house or something does. I think a lot of people, particularly perhaps atheists, are just the opposite. They are like, oh, I don't believe in ghosts. I don't think there's actually such a thing as a ghost, so I'm not scared of that. But the idea that someone could just go wrong in the head and then do terrible things to me, or that I could go wrong in the head and do terrible things to somebody else, that's a really frightening idea. And I acknowledge that is a frightening idea. I guess personally, I feel settled enough in my own sanity or something. I'm not afraid of being Norman Bates.
You're not afraid of being Norman Bates, and you're not afraid of not spotting Norman Bates at this point in your life.
Yeah. And then maybe some of that's because I've watched all these darn movies, but yeah. I mean, I've been snookered by people, though. I think we probably could all think of somebody that's been a Norman Bates.
And we all may be right now.
Yeah. All right. Well, we need to talk about the big picture thoughts. Do you guys have any big picture thoughts on before we get to the movie itself, on the inherent fascination of this material? Like, why does our culture love serial killers so much? What's the deal with that? Why are these stories so fascinating?
Well, now that you asked in the context of what you just said, I wonder to what extent it's a replacement for the supernatural. There's got to be some dark hidden world that explains our world. And maybe it's just in our minds and emotions.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's what I was thinking about this, and I think that's what I would say. I think atheists need their boogeymen too. They need their demons. They need their jinns.
And a way to cope with the evil of this world that's out there.
Yeah.
You know, which is to say the same thing, I guess, but the evil that's in man. I mean, one of the weird things about horror and the problem of sin, the problem of evil, the problem of original sin is one of the most obvious truths in all of our existence.
Right. There's not a philosophy or a religion that doesn't try and deal with it somehow.
Yeah. And yet it is one of the most denied, like intellectually denied realities of our existence too. So it's like fundamental, undeniable. If you're going to point out one thing about human nature that's undeniable, it's the fact that we are all messed up and do evil things and do things that we don't want to do or know we should not do, and have troubled consciences because of it. Like, that is, you can't get more, I don't know that you can get more fundamental than that.
Right.
And so it's like the problem of human existence is the problem of evil and why we do bad things. And everybody works hard to deny that about themselves, works hard to deny that about the world we live in, and has to cope with it some way or another. It has to come out. It has to be dealt with. And the intellectual incongruity of it all has to be reckoned with.
Right.
How's that first?
The intellectual. Well, it's interesting to me as you talk, because I'm like, couldn't they do that through just believing in a little bit of evil, or in, we're all compromised by evil? And yet there seems to be this need in people to believe in unmitigated, remorseless evil.
Yeah.
Like we all need an actual devil, whether we think it's Norman Bates or
and
we think
an
it's
actual scapegoat.
Yeah.
Well, but even in this movie, I don't think it's just Hitchcock's desire to tie up every plot thread that makes a connection from Norman Bates to us.
Right.
And that's a fascination with these serial killer shows, and has been for a long time, is, oh, you too have this same unplumbed darkness, and if just in the right circumstances, who knows, maybe mysteriously you could be drawn in to become unmitigated evil yourself. You could be the devil.
And wouldn't you like it?
Right.
Is part of it too. Isn't there a thrill to it? Isn't there something enjoyable about it? It's like that bit I've been reading or rereading Orthodoxy by Chesterton, and he talks about this very thing where he says, you either have to admit that you can get some real pleasure in skinning a cat, and that skinning a cat would just be evil. Like, you can't deny either one of those premises. So instead we try to deny the cat. Like, and that's his Chestertonian way of being clever and saying we just try to skirt the whole problem and divert it.
Mm-hmm.
But it's that exact sort of thing. It's like nobody can handle the tension of yes, there is a weird pleasure we derive from evil acts, and that's what draws us to them. And the reality that they are in fact evil, and we know they're evil. Both of those things exist at the same time, and these movies and types of things exist to play with both sides of it. And maybe Psycho plays much more heavily with one side than the other.
Mm-hmm.
But certainly a lot of true crime drama plays with the, wouldn't that be cool? Wouldn't that be interesting? Don't you secretly wish? Wouldn't you find, what is exhilarating? What does motivate people? What do they enjoy about? Like, they explore those types of questions in a way that's really sick and perverse.
Mm-hmm.
But they do explore it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, it's part of the Augustine thing you always bring up, Jake, which is you want to see the corpse on the side of the road.
Mm-hmm.
You want to see under the hood into the depths of human evil. And I mean, if you want to, true crime stories are a great way to do that, a great way to indulge your sick curiosity and also comfort yourself with the difference, and also to derive, the difference between those people and you, and also derive pleasure from the similarity, the similar perversity between those people
And
you.
have a plausible way out of, well, I'm just reading history, or I'm watching or participating in something historical, and this is the way the world really is, and we all would do well to face it and reckon with it, right? Like,
or
so
I'm just watching fiction.
Yeah,
well, it goes either way.
Right, it goes either way.
But, which is why I think the ending of this movie is actually kind of brilliant. I mean, I'm just jumping the gun maybe a little bit, but I think Hitchcock intentionally cast that psychiatrist dude to be glib and full of himself. And it's like, yeah, he'll tie everything up for you and tell you there's all this Freudian thing. Like, he gives us a way out. Like, we're not Norman Bates. Norman Bates had X, Y, and Z happen to him, and it's really terrible. And, he disassociated and blah, blah, blah. Here's all this jargon. And you do kind of have a little bit of a safety net at the end of this heart of darkness that you've peered into. But then we cut to Norman, and suddenly we're sharing his head, and we're sharing his, as one critic I read said, his cosmic alienation. Norman's cosmic alienation at the end is in the prison that he's in his mind is the prison that we're all in. And we're meant to still find him as a figure of identification. I don't think that last shot is all just like, oh, there's Norman. He's bad, just like the psychiatrist said.
Outside of you.
No.
Relegated.
Well, it's funny because the psychiatrist says, oh, no, we psychiatrists, we don't create anything. We just reveal what's there, which is hilarious. You could that felt tongue in cheek. But then my wife and I found ourselves referring to the killer as, well, but then she did this, and no, wait, we're falling into the psychiatrist explanation trap. Like, we don't believe his explanation.
It's fascinating. I mean, I've seen this movie a bunch, and in that parlor scene where my favorite scene in the movie, I think the best scene in the movie, where Norman's talking to her, every time I find myself just entering into the drama of a young man who's been
who's the victim of his mother and of the highway.
Yeah, and is he going to? He doesn't want to put her into an institution. He wants to take care of her, and it's like I have to actively remind myself he's talking about a dead person. This guy is nuts, but it's actually a very moving scene, just played straight, and it works, and it plays. And as I said, I forget on mic or off mic. Like, I think off mic. There's a version of this movie where Marion Crane leaves the hotel. She thinks that was kind of an odd conversation, but man, that guy really turned my life around.
It is, like you said, off mic. One of the great parts of the movie is the fact that had Mother not killed Marion, she was ready to go back and make things right. Like, it would have turned her life around.
And if we can believe Detective Arbogast, they were prepared to forgive her and hush it up. Maybe she'd have lost her job, but she wouldn't have gone to jail. So she really had a shot at redemption. And Hitchcock, I mean, he doesn't like character. He says he doesn't like character, but I mean, he certainly is not above symbolism and character kind of writ large. He likes the idea of there's a baptism that's happening that gets horribly interrupted. Like, she's taking a shower to wash herself clean, and then it all goes sideways rather famously. Okay, so big picture thoughts on this film, gentlemen.
Big picture? What kind of big picture thoughts you want?
I don't know. Did you like it? Did you think it was scary?
I had a lot of fun with it. I just had a lot of fun with it. I don't know. Maybe I'm a psycho, but
I was talking. So Ben's wife was over at the house yesterday with my wife, and I talked to Megan a little bit about it, and she said she had to watch the movie. Basically, Ben, I guess you narrated the second half of the movie to her because she was so creeped out. She just didn't. She it was a soundtrack. She couldn't even watch it. To me, when I hear that, I'm just like, bullseye. Yes, the movie did what it's supposed to. That's so exciting and great. Like, maybe I am a psycho, but when I was a kid, I mean, it all goes back to childhood trauma. My grandpa, he'd put on a scary old black and white something or other, some stupid Twilight Zone or something. And then he'd go outside and he'd creep up to the window and he'd have like a branch or something and he'd hit the window and rattle it. And so if there's a movie that doesn't cross whatever line I have, I find it so much fun. I mean, I do. What I wish this movie didn't have actually was so much of Janet Leigh in her bra.
yeah,
That's the thing that's annoying to me.
yeah.
But as a thriller, I'm either desensitized or I just have a certain distance from it or whatever, and I like it. I mean, there is definitely a gleeful fatalist inside of me who wants to be a gleeful nihilist, some that wants to be thrown a chunk of meat every once in a while, just told how truly alienated we all are and how psychotic we all are. And so it's not even Norman Bates that I think feeds that. It is Norman, but it's also just like the secretary who took tranquilizers on her wedding night, the cop, like everybody's actually a psycho in this movie. Like Hitchcock's view of human nature is just so dark. Mm-hmm. I will cop to there being a part of me that has fun with that too. But I think I have fun with it as a thriller, as a fun little puzzle to figure out. Even knowing the twist when the sheriff says, "Norma Bates has been dead for such many years." It's such a great dun dun dun. So I do like this movie. I find it sort of cosmically frightening, I guess, like thematically frightening. I've seen it enough that I'm not like particularly like, oh no, covering my eyes or anything. Ben, big picture thoughts?
I mean, I think it was unsettling, successfully unsettling. I mean, on the one hand, I like it. It's really well put together, well engineered. Perkins is amazing.
Yeah.
Does an amazing job.
I think when I say I had fun with it, I'm thinking of just watching him.
Yeah.
He's great.
Chew up the screen.
Yeah.
Do his job.
He's amazing.
He's amazing.
He is amazing. I don't know if I would say
he's got like this, like point to different people. Like I've got a couple of people in real life and I won't say their names, but then you can even kind of point to certain actors that have similar levels of like charm and like a young Andrew Garfield. Or
if you had to cast this movie today, Andrew Garfield, maybe from a few years ago, would be like Andrew Garfield circa Spider-Man.
Yeah.
Would be great casting.
Yeah. Like he's the best I could come up with. It is just sort of like, who has that level of like charm and sweetness and
self-deprecation.
Yeah. Like where do you pull that? Like
when he says there's some Bates Hotel motel stationery.
I think he would probably cast Tom Holland actually, but
he wouldn't bring the other stuff.
Right.
But he could bring the charm. Yeah. Norman Bates reminds me of a lot of people from my real life. People who have that sweetness. It's like the guy that the small, undark version it's the guy that you lend money to again, even though you know he's going to not pay you back, but you just like him for some reason.
Mm-hmm.
Like
he does a good job of evoking pity and just that little boyishness, right? That like, I want to help the little boy.
Yeah. He kind of comes jogging up almost like a puppy dog when Marion shows up. And
yeah. Well, I was going to say, I don't know if I like it as a whole. I don't want to go watch it again. I'm always conflicted in things like this. I mean, I'm not really a horror movie guy.
Sure.
But even as a kid, I remember seeing, like horror light stuff like What Lies Beneath with Harrison Ford. Did you guys see that?
That classic, yeah.
Yeah.
it's sarcasm. People don't go watch it.
No,
it's stupid.
no. I've seen a few things like that. I mean, even The Sixth Sense.
Mm-hmm.
And what else? The Others.
Nicole Kidman and Others?
Yeah.
That one was kind of fun. I remember that one.
Yeah, it was. But I think the question I always ask is what I always feel a little uneasy, sort of along the lines of Augustine, whatever.
What am I feeding?
Yeah. I just always do. I don't know what else to say about that.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think it's worth saying because that's something you have to deal with if you're going to watch a movie like this.
Yeah.
People's mileage may vary on that. I don't know what else to say. I don't find this one to cross that line, whatever that line is.
Mm-hmm.
Although I did forget, again, how much sort of semi-weird 1950s style nudity stuff we had to put up with.
Yeah, I had never seen it before, so I didn't know.
Yeah.
And so I was sort of like, oh, wow. And it just kept going.
Yeah.
Right.
It's like,
Yeah.
okay,
it's
we're
pretty
going to
long.
get through this pretty quick, I hope.
Yeah, I don't
I guess
appreciate
we're not.
that.
I guess we're not.
Yeah.
In not having seen it, it's like, how much of what they're talking about is important to the plot here? I don't know.
Right.
I have no idea. Like, I just don't. So it was just
All of
like
it or
hard.
none
It
of
was
it.
like, yeah, that's what it, and so it ended up being all of it. And it was
Right.
like, well, okay, well, now that I've done that, I know that I can I can just skip that scene
Mm-hmm.
moving forward. But yeah, it was still really
Yeah.
obnoxious.
Yeah. Yeah, it's obnoxious. And it is Hitchcock being a provocateur and trying to push your buttons. And certainly people back then would have had their buttons much more pushed than even the most puritanical of people that would watch the movie now, just because the level of public indecency is so different than it was back then. But this movie's doing any number of things like that. I mean, there's a lot of innuendo. There's the just Janet Leigh in her bra all the time. And then they show a toilet, which apparently was a big deal. And not just a toilet, but a flushing toilet. This is the first movie to do that. And I saw an interview with the screenwriter where he was like, we were going to so unsettle the audience with this toilet, which you'll remember happens right before the famous murder, that by the time the murder happened, they were going to be diving under their seat. It's like the toilet was part of the strategy to so like wind people up, tear apart their inhibitions and stuff. Which is fascinating because now you see the toilet and you're like, okay, like you would never clock that it was even a provocation. I don't think now.
No.
But apparently it was. I mean, this is the era where we're going to be careful with the censors talking about pregnancy. I mean, old sitcoms from the 50s, you don't even say that a woman's pregnant. Like the word, it just has too many connotations of like, they must have done something to get pregnant. I mean, I guess. It's like, it's amazing to think how much the world's changed. So did either of you guys find this movie to actually be like frightening in the sense that you'd expect a scary movie to be?
Yeah. Yeah, I did. Especially once, let's see, anything inside the house for me. Anything, the detective going into the house, Lila exploring the rooms, that stuff got me the most.
I don't think of myself as desensitized to horror or thrillers or anything like that. I've not seen a lot, actually.
Mm.
But I nothing in this movie got me or got to me. The funnest jump scary type thing was when Mother comes flying out of the bedroom
At Arbogast.
with the top down shot, which I just thought, oh, that was cool. That was a fun idea. Like, and that really, and then I had a lot of fun with him falling down the stairs. Like,
Yeah.
I just like
love that
loved
shot.
the thinking about the mechanic of it, like
Right.
in the artfulness of it. So I don't know. Like I don't know if it was just the right mood or
Just
the right moment.
A connoisseur sipping his wine.
It wasn't quite like that, but I don't know. Maybe some of it was, I watched it with Amanda and my oldest son, and
Well, if you're a dad in that situation, then you have one of two choices. Number one, don't do it. Number two, have fun with it. Like,
yeah. And
enjoy the fact that they're scared by it. Like,
that's, I think, more of how I processed it, was like, oh, wow, this is like really doing its work on these people on the couch next to me. This is kind of fun to observe happening. And I don't know. I was just kind of like, I just thought it was fun.
yeah, I get a big old kick out of that. And that's one of the reasons I enjoy some certain movies like this.
I mean, I'm the kind of guy who even when his own house is empty, except for him, he can at times get a little freaked out.
Oh, no, I can do that to
me
myself too.
yeah.
Oh, okay. All right. Well,
I actually
that's
have
for the same.
But it's usually like Nathan was talking about earlier. It's not this. Like, this is prosaic.
No, I'm scared of ghosts. I really am.
But the supernatural, that's different. Like, I have enough of a sense of, we live in a spiritual world that we deny and don't know jack squat about, that stuff. And I can trip myself out on that stuff real easy. But the idea of just some, like,
a maniac or
the maniac next door that, for whatever reason,
That gets to me. Since I was a little kid, I'm just realizing as we talk, I've always thought about, well, okay, I had my back turned. Someone could have made it into the closet behind me. So I need to open that and be ready and look inside. And then I can close it. Then I go to the next one. Okay, I cleared the room. Like, I remember doing things like that. I don't know where I got that from, but I'm sure it's from movies.
Yeah, that's really interesting. If my wife and kids aren't home and it's night, I'll be scared of like a specter at the window, or like those are the kinds of things I imagine are creakings and groanings and like Ebenezer Scrooge type stuff almost. But yeah, I mean, I find this movie creepy, not on a scene to scene basis. I find the idea of, I guess I would say the idea that you don't know where the threshold is. Like in a fairy tale, you always know when you're crossing into fairyland. You know when and where. Like if you go into the woods, the big bad wolf might get you. But there is something unsettling about this movie's idea that Marion Crane, yeah, she crossed the threshold in Campbellian terms when she stole the money. But really, she was just doing her thing, and she had no idea she was crossing the threshold into darkness when she pulled off the road into this random hotel. Like she doesn't. It's like in society, we know there's as long as we don't cross certain lines, as long as we don't go to that neighborhood, as long as we don't cross the tracks, as long as we don't go in the woods, as long as we don't talk to those people, we have an idea we'll be okay. And this movie says, nah, maybe not. Maybe you just signed your death warrant and you don't even know it. Maybe you just picked the wrong hotel. Maybe you just got in the car at the wrong time. Maybe you just said hi to the wrong person. And I do find that idea pretty scary. All right, let's talk through this movie. We got the credits, the most 1960s credits ever. Saul Bass invented kinetic typography. Or he didn't invent kinetic typography, but he invented this style of kinetic typography.
Kinetic typography.
Yes, moving words, my friends.
Oh.
It's like that 1960s kind of North by Northwest or Psycho style. And we're immediately in, we have these great credits, this Bernard Herrmann score telling us how terrible everything's going to be. And we're immediately in black and white. And we immediately have something that critics, the critics have often pondered over, which is why include Phoenix, Arizona, 2:43 p.m.
Yeah, it's 3 in a row. It's place, date, and time.
Right. As if any of it matters. Even to setting up Marion's story. Like even assuming Marion's story is the real story and Norman Bates never does his thing. Like why?
Is it some kind of joke on Hitchcock's part?
No, I think it's intentional, and I think it what it does is it says you are in a gauntlet. So it focuses you, right? When you see that in a specific time, was it 2:42?
Yeah, 2:43, I think.
2:43 p.m. Okay, what it says is, all right, you're now in a scene, you're in a location, and you're at a specific time, and everything that happens now, scene by scene, moving forward, it matters. So you better pay attention to time, sequence, and order of details. And so it ends up working as sort of like a distracting element, but it also like gets you super focused in and drawn in.
By the way, when the police put this story together, they're going to say it started at 2:40. It's almost that kind
or
of
something
sense.
like that. Mm-hmm. Yeah, right. So it creates this like expectation for you as a viewer, and so it's like, okay, I need to know that we're in Phoenix. I need to know that that it's 2:43. I need to know these details, and I need to also be paying attention to other details like this because this is Hitchcock, and it's all going to make sense and piece itself together.
Mm-hmm.
It just puts you in a certain mentality or frame of mind that I think achieves an effect like the toilet, right? If the point of the toilet is, oh wow, toilet.
What other taboos will they cross?
Yeah, and then suddenly mother shows up with a knife in her hand. Like, oh shoot, like I was thinking about the toilet, I didn't expect that. This gets you, I think, I mean, you could say, like, I haven't put too much thought in it, but if it gets you hyper focused on details and the details of what's coming next, and then maybe that primes you to miss the big picture of, actually, I think that Norman might be the killer.
Yeah. Well, what Hitchcock wants you to do through the first third of this movie is focus on that money. He keeps cutting back to the money, the money, the money, the money. It's all about the money.
Right. Well, and so even in that sense, like it is definitely a contributing factor to the idea that Marion's story and the details of it matter.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Like, and so it plays into the joke, if you want to call it that, or the surprise, the setup of actually she's dead and we're halfway through the movie. Mm-hmm. We have a whole nother half of the movie left.
I will say, we were asking for our big picture thoughts on this movie. I love Marion's story so much that I'm actually always disappointed. I've seen this movie probably a dozen times, and every time I'm like, oh man, Norman's going to kill her? Why does this movie have to be about Psycho? I'm invested in this woman and her parent. Like, this is a pretty good Hitchcock movie that's happening right here, and Norman Bates ruins it for us. Come on, man.
It's a great, I want to say joke.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a great conceit.
But like, I find myself caring about her when she's maternal towards poor Norman in the wonderful parlor scene. It's like, and when she looks like she's going to find some redemption. It's like nobody ever watches this movie now and doesn't know, even if they don't know the big twist with Norma Bates and Norman, they at least know that Marion Crane's done for.
Yeah, the biggest, if there's any surprise for related to Marion Crane, it's how quickly she dies.
Right.
How quickly the shower scene actually comes. That's the only surprise left for anybody who hasn't seen this movie.
Yeah. But I like her story. I like her. I mean, I don't like the tawdriness with which Hitchcock tells, especially the first part of the story, but it's very relatable. You know, this woman who's like about to be past her prime and she just wants to get married, and her boyfriend's a total sap, and she's got this stupid stifling office job, and then this boorish man with the $40,000, and she makes one dumb mistake, and then she's guilt-ridden, and all the stuff with the cops and the car salesman and like all that stuff. Like that's a really good movie. I like that movie a lot better than I like the Sam and Lila, adventures.
Yeah. Well, I don't know if you were waiting to ask questions like this, but I was just going to give thoughts on the structure.
Yeah.
Like the fact that it does that, sets you up with this other movie and then destroys it. It's part of the world. It's part of Hitchcock's view of human nature. Like everyone has these dark secrets. Mm-hmm. And now Marion's part of that world too, because she stole something.
Right.
And now she
didn't have a dark secret before that?
I'm not saying she didn't. I just think you don't know what it is, do you?
Oh,
she was sleeping with a married man.
Oh,
is he married? He's divorced.
Wait,
isn't he?
He's in the process of divorce.
Oh, is it? Okay.
That's right.
But he's not divorced
on her
yet.
lunch break in a seedy motel.
There you go. Okay. Yeah. I forgot that. It's very important. So yes. So everyone is twisted and has secrets.
But then you have like the line, the wonderful little other secretary lady played by Patricia Hitchcock, Hitchcock's daughter, who says she took tranquilizers on her. Her husband was furious when he found out she took tranquilizers on her honeymoon, and she just throws that out there.
Yeah.
I
think that's important,
and
though.
she's offering drugs to Marion, and then this other creepy boor guy with all the money is coming on to her in a really creepy old man way.
Yeah.
And it's just like, this is a world of darkness where everyone
and then
has
he turns
darkness.
around and claims that she was flirting with him.
Well, in her mind, she does. I never thought that he actually, because he doesn't. You don't see him say that. It's like she's creating characters in her mind, which is a little foreshadowing of Norman creating.
And the characters she creates are pretty dark. She has like the guy say, "I'll tear the flesh off her" or something.
Yeah,
I think this movie's point of view is,
which plays very much into that, her sympathy with Norman.
Yeah,
yeah.
They are both. I mean, I think this movie sees everybody as, well, I don't know. I'll ask the question. I don't think Norman Bates is actually the only crazy person in Hitchcock's point of view.
No, I think that whole parlor scene, the whole point is we all are.
We're all in our private cages.
And in some of us, one decision makes or breaks it, right? One act, one crazy act, one decision leads to another, leads to another, leads to another. And so she was just a normal, boring secretary that got caught up with a guy who owns or works at a hardware store. And she felt some pressure. She had an opportunity. She had this life she wanted to live. She made a decision. And she always thought that up until actually, this is why details matter in movies, like they're written this way for a reason. Up until her boss saw her on the crosswalk in her car, she felt like she could, she was play acting. she could always go back. She was playing a little game with herself.
Mm-hmm.
She could still fix it.
Mm-hmm.
Up until that moment where she got cornered, she wasn't bothered. She was just playing a game.
Yeah.
And then she felt trapped and cornered, and now she was on the run because she'd been caught at something that I'm not even. I think Hitchcock wants us to think she wasn't even committed to.
Do you think that the two stories are supposed to intersect karmically? Like, in other words, is Norman Bates' retribution for the money, like she made a mistake and then she pays the ultimate price? Is that the story we're telling, or is it she made a mistake and unrelated to that, natural selection happened and she got weeded out of the gene pool because she met a psychopath who...
It's just like a nested series of traps or something. That's how it felt more to me. Not like karmic per se, but like, well, as an illustration of how everyone's in their own private trap, now you're in Norman's private trap.
Well, in that sense, like, I don't think that if she does get retribution, I don't think it's for the $400,000. I think it's for sleeping with the man.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, and in that sense, she does bring it on. She doesn't do anything to provoke Norman, but he is provoked by her sexuality. He is activated by the fact that she's a sexually potent young lady.
That's right.
And so it's like the thing that she was using to try and snare a husband is the thing, not really her fault with Norman, but it's the thing that does her in. So,
well, she does actively suggest that he get rid of his mom. And so that's like her trying to displace the mom, whatever.
Yeah. I mean,
and she's not using her sexuality in that moment to do that. Like, she is suggesting to Norman that there are women, maybe even women like her out there. And like, that's part of it.
Right.
When a pretty woman looks at a handsome young man and says, honey, you're trapped and there are good women out there. There's subtext. There's subtext.
Yeah.
And she may not have in any way, as a character, she may not have in any way intended to promote herself, but she also was promoting herself.
Mm-hmm.
Like, she was using herself. She was using her sexuality. It was all there.
Well, Mrs. Bates did not like that very much at all.
She didn't. Mother took offense.
Mother took offense.
There was a problem, and Mom, that's what moms are for. They deal with problems.
It's true. Mother, the blood. It is kind of fun to imagine, or fun might not be the right word, but like the mechanics of Norman dresses up as a mom. He stabs this woman, then he goes back, he gets undressed, he turns around, mother, he sees a pile of bloody clothes or whatever it is. And like, what are actually the mechanics of, in the novel, he gets drunk and that's what triggers like every time he drinks too much, he becomes mother. And that was, I think, Bloch attempting to solve that problem. But Hitchcock rightfully thinks, yeah, it's not a problem we actually need to solve.
Yeah.
Yep.
Have the psychiatrist say a bunch of glib jargon at the end and we can just buy it.
Part of the horror actually is who knows what had to happen.
Right.
Like, if you want to think about it, there are all kinds of horrible things that you can think. There are all kinds of horrible thoughts that you can think.
Yeah.
There are all kinds of, like, let's not forget that there's a mummified body of mother up in the bedroom. Like,
in the window when she shows up. Yeah. Yeah. I'm wondering now if, going back to the question of the Phoenix, Arizona 243, whatever, it doesn't make it feel like karma, but it does make it feel like, just especially with the camera roving through the city. It's like there's a million stories. This Norman Bates could intersect with anyone's life, but our camera is going to pick these people. And then we go through the window and it kind of gives you that sense of, here's a thing that's happening. Wheels have been put in motion and it could happen to anybody.
Well, and it's also super decadent. Like let's live with 243 again. This is her lunch break.
Yeah.
And it's 2:43.
Yeah. That's a long time.
That's a big lunch break. Like, when did she go on her lunch break that she's so late to get back for? 1, 2? Like, I mean, how late do you want it to start? Because I'm putting it at somewhere between 11 and 12.
Yep. Yeah, we could be gracious and say she got a late lunch, 1 o'clock.
Okay. All right. So 2 hours.
Yeah. It is interesting to me, and I can't decide whether this is me reading this into the movie from 60 years now vantage point, or whether it's part of the movie's design, and that none of the women, including Janet Leigh, feel sexual in a way that reads as sexual to me exactly. Like even Janet Leigh, for all that we see of her and for all the things she's asked to do, has kind of a cold mother or grandmotherly kind of air. She's got a certain kind of hair. She's got a cold sort of frigid quality to her. Like there's not a lot of heat between her and the Sam character. I mean, there's tawdriness, there's stuff that we see that we all wish wasn't in the movie. But in terms of chemistry between the actors, the only person that the character of Marion, or the actress Janet Leigh, has any chemistry in this movie is Norman. And I don't know if that's part of the. And then you've got Lila, who's also this like not like desexed in a certain sort of way woman. And I don't know if that's just me thinking that all 1950s style babes are kind of desexed one way or another, or if that's the movie, part of the movie's design. But I don't know. I mean, I actually kind of feel the same way about Grace Kelly or even Marie Saint in North by Northwest for being as overtly sexual as Hitchcock wants them to be. They have a kind of frigidity, a kind of coldness to them. I mean, Hitchcock's type, I guess, is a woman that's very sexually available, but also
emotionally unavailable.
Emotionally unavailable. Yeah, there, you put your finger on it. None of these women give you anything emotionally. The only person that Marion really gives herself to emotionally is Norman.
Hitchcock doesn't care about people.
Yeah.
So why would he care about that?
I guess.
But he makes it part of what he's doing.
Yeah.
Somehow.
He
makes it a feature, in other words.
Yeah. It's not a bug. I mean, it makes this movie peculiar and interesting in its own way. All right. So we all go a little mad sometimes. Marion goes a little bit mad, steals money from Mr. Cassidy. Anything you guys want to say about Mr. Cassidy or the office scene? Or I think we've already said it. Which
just
is
some fun went into that character, and I like that.
Mr. Cassidy.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was interesting to me how much they wanted him to be boorish, but he wasn't as boorish as he would be now if you wrote the character. Like maybe in the age of Me Too, you just have to do a little bit more to say, this guy's a creeper, but they didn't overplay their hand. They played their hand. They just didn't overplay their hand with that character. You will pick up on a lot of mother and parent stuff. That guy has a daughter whose life he's kind of trying to control one way or another. He tells Marion about. Sam and Marion say, when they're joking around in their little bedroom tryst, he says, we could go back to your house. So we'd have to turn the portrait of mother around.
Well, and there's the whole thing about him being willing to meet her mother in the first place.
Right. I hate talk about like microaggressions, and I hate all the sort of like women live in a world where men are always mansplaining and manspreading and all this kind of stuff. But I think Hitchcock does a nice job of putting you in the paranoid mind of Marion Crane in such a way that you do feel threatened by pretty much every male character in this movie until Norman Bates.
Right.
I mean, the Mr. Cassidy doesn't have to do anything overtly, you know, he doesn't slap her on the butt or anything like that. But you just feel like this is the kind of man that probably is predatory towards young women one way or another.
Well, he's said so. He's basically said, I'm willing to buy anybody I want. And so what's your price, baby?
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, the whole point of giving her that cash was to flex. I never carry around more money than I can stand to lose.
Right. And the fact that this is happening all in front of her impotent little mustached boss guy makes him complicit in it. I mean, it really is.
Yeah, he's like dangling her as bait.
Well, yeah. And what does the comic relief secretary lady say? Like, I can't imagine why he didn't want to talk to me. Or
it's because he saw the ring on my finger.
Yeah. She wants. You wish, Patricia Hitchcock. So she steals the $40K. You could buy a whole gallon of gas in Biden's America for that much. It's a wonderful amount of money. And she sees her boss. She drives away. She hits the highway. I just think this is a wonderful section of the movie. Like, I think this is its own compelling story. I think Hitchcock probably did just intend it as a joke. Like, I actually, as Hitchcock, do not care about these characters or this story that much. But at least that's how he always talked about it. Like it's all just set up to pull the rug out from under your feet. But I think it's its own really good movie. Maybe just because Hitchcock's a natural filmmaker. Maybe because he had sympathy for these actors. I don't know. But like, is there a better fear of authority scene than the policeman? Like the image of him staring through the window. I mean, that sticks with me about as much as anything in this movie. And the whole thing kind of reminds me of guilt dreams I've had and things. Like, it really puts you in the mind of somebody who ran away. I mean, even just the conversation with the car mechanic guy, it's like, it's really well done and well observed. Like, this is how he would be. This is how she would be. And then the cop across the street.
Yeah.
Sort of sinister, but then as she leaves, he kind of reveals himself. Like, we get a moment or two sort of outside Marion's head there. I don't know. I mean, would you guys say that, in your point of view, is this beginning just the Shaggy Dog story, just a setup for a payoff, or does it resonate as something more than that?
I think I already kind of said what I thought about that. Like, thematically, everyone's hiding something. There's all these deep, dark secrets everywhere. Otherwise, I don't know what to think. It works. It works to get you invested in the movie.
Yeah.
I guess that's what a Shaggy Dog story is for, but I don't know what else to say.
I mean, I resent the idea of it as a Shaggy Dog story because, I mean, like I said, I actually do resent Norman Bates or Norma Bates or whoever Mrs. Bates. This movie does feel like it kind of ends with the shower scene to me in some ways, at least in terms of my actual engagement with any kind of human being. I mean, what Hitchcock wants you to do is actually transfer your loyalty to Norman there when he comes out and cleans up. And you do. I mean, there's a famous moment where you're not sure if the car is going to sink. And as an audience member, you're like, oh, come on, car. Which is,
the whole point.
The classic Hitchcock trick. The only reason to put that car in is to not only to make you sympathize with Norman, but then to rub your nose in it and make you say, oh, wait a second. I want this guy to get rid of this body. What's wrong with me? Hitchcock loves that kind of thing. Okay, so she gets to the hotel, Bates Hotel, and we meet the wonderful Norman Bates, played by Anthony Perkins, a guy who loves his mother. And
12 vacancies.
12 vacancies. 12 rooms, 12 vacancies. There's some stationery with Bates Motel in case you want to make your friends back home jealous. And he like laughs at himself a little bit after he's like
delivers the line that he's been practicing.
Yeah, the line that he's been practicing. I'll be right back with my trusty umbrella. I mean, it is wonderful. He is the first non-threatening male in this whole movie. I mean, I guess Sam, her boyfriend, is but he's such a stiff, square, like unsympathetic.
Mm-hmm.
Like he's kind of
and he's teasing and harassing her.
Yeah,
he's he's gonna make the promises on one end, but also he's like, yeah, I don't want to meet your mom. Okay, fine, I'll do it. But only if it ends with a little, you know what, and
got to turn that picture around. It is like if this movie was just a domestic drama, there's no way he's happy when she shows up with the money. Like it's such a stupid thing that she's doing. It's like, I mean, there's no way that anyone of sense would be happy either. But this guy's like such a square. Like he's not even going to be happy on any level. So, all right, we've talked around and talked a little bit about the greatness of Anthony Perkins. What do you guys think it is like that makes this performance such a magical portrait of madness or whatever it is? Like, what's the trick? How's he doing it? This is number 2 on the AFI's top 100 villains after Anthony Hopkins' whatchamacallit?
Hannibal Lecter.
2 Anthonys. Good for Anthony's play good psychos, I guess.
Followed by Darth Vader.
Followed by Darth
number
Vader.
3.
Yep. But Darth Vader should have been number 1, frankly speaking. I mean, if I say villain movie and you have to complete the next sentence and you don't have time to think, if I just go up to somebody in the street and say, villain movie, go, they say Darth Vader. They don't say Norman Bates. They don't say Hannibal Lecter. They say Darth Vader. Totally.
Yeah, that's iconography related. It's not necessarily effective on screen. There's a reason.
No,
or even influential on screen.
Yeah. Performance-wise, I'd say Anthony Perkins is right up there for sure. Well, what do you guys think? How's it work?
It's really hard to quantify. It's kind of magical. I mean, some of it is just like genetics. Like he's got that
little
handsome, boyish kind of thing going on already. So some of it's just casting. But yeah, I don't know. There's a charm and sweetness, that boyish charm and sweetness that he's able to give you that makes it really creepy and awesome.
Yeah.
What it taps into is a real type, actually. Like, I think, okay, I mean, if we want to get canceled, he's tapping into his broken sexuality, which, if you've known people who are this way and are hiding dark secrets, it just resonates as true, as real life. And so there are people that he reminds me of that have that similar sort of like
sweet, boyish
innocent thing that's hiding a real sexual brokenness or deviancy and deep dark secrets that are really twisted, and they fool a whole lot of people, and they are really good at getting sympathy and are really good at just sort of drawing you in and making you pity them, and then eventually, and nobody ever wants to believe the worst thing, and there is a secret, there is a thing behind it, and eventually it comes out. And I've seen that story play out in multiple people, and I have very particular people in mind that Norman Bates reminds me of in real life. And so you have a man who was likely sexually molested and who certainly was gay and deeply troubled by his conscience and by his...
You mean in Anthony Perkins?
In real life. Yeah. And I think he's tapping into all of those things in a way that's visceral and real and really sad, actually, if you think about it.
Yeah, I think that's true. There's a kind of sweetness. Somebody who's been stunted in their sexuality, they can turn out all kinds of ways, but I think we've all known people who have a sweetness, like they learned how to please, maybe to avoid danger in a terrible family situation. They learned how to be pleasing, how to smile, how to have charm as a defense mechanism, and they never got rid of a bunch of boyish things that can actually be quite charming in a...
Well, they find that those things end up serving them well in all kinds of contexts.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think he definitely reminds me of people too, and just feels much more real and down to earth as a portrait of us. So the mistake that actors make, I think, is I'm playing a psychopath, so I need to play psycho. I need to play madness. And no mad person ever thinks they're mad. A mad person thinks he's the king of England. And so if you're portraying that person on screen, what you need to do is not play a crazy person, play the king of England.
Exactly.
And I think that's what Anthony Perkins does so well in this performance. He's not playing a crazy guy with a bad mother. He's playing
a broken boy
with a bad mother. He's just playing that. He there's a couple shots in the movie, namely the famous last shot where he is playing the iconography of madness. And he's good at that too. But for most of the movie, but those are just short punchlines. For most of the movie, he's just playing the reality of what Norman Bates thinks.
Including the cunning.
Yeah.
Like the cunning that you realize is always... It becomes more obvious as the movie goes on.
But it's not the cunning of, I've got to cover up my crimes. It's the cunning of, oh, my mother's going to get in trouble. And I think he just... and
I have to protect her.
And And you're right. He threads a nice needle of darkness, like of getting darker as it goes on. Mm-hmm. But, I was trying to think of who, like, it's the difference between Heath Ledger's Joker and Jared Leto's like, I'm the Joker, therefore I must do crazy things. Whereas Heath Ledger is playing, I'm a very smart, broken, anarchist rogue who happens to be crazy. Like, I'm not playing crazy. And I would argue Heath Ledger's at his least compelling when he's playing crazy. Like, I'm fiddling with the detonator in my crazy nurse costume. I don't like that stuff half as much as when he walks into the gangsters the first time. And it's like, this guy's smart. This guy's, he's wearing war paint, as they talk about in the movie, but he's not just a psychopath. Like, he has a real point of view. He has real wounds. Like, you can't play the Joker as the Joker. You have to play the Joker as something else, whatever that may be. And it's the same problem with Joaquin Phoenix. Like, Joaquin Phoenix isn't given anything to do in that stupid movie besides just
crazy.
Be crazy. And it's like, I don't know people who are just crazy, quote unquote. I know people who think the wrong thing about themselves or are broken in a way, but they have a logic in their own head that makes sense to them. And that's the way to play psychopaths.
And it's completely consistent with itself.
Yeah, exactly. The scary thing, as Chesterton says in Orthodoxy, the scary thing is that it's a closed loop, that there's no sunshine in it. And like, it's actually more rational. Like he says, the man in the madhouse who thinks he's the king of England, like that's if you were the king of England and they were trying to persecute you and keeping you from the throne, they'd put you in a madhouse. There's nothing in his worldview that doesn't make absolute sense, that isn't absolutely explicable. And that's how Norman Bates is. And and Anthony Perkins is so good at it that I'm actually pulled into the drama every time. I love that parlor scene. Best scene in the movie. Best scene maybe in Hitchcock's career, I'd say. Best dialogue scene, at least. I'm always pulled into the drama of Marion and Norman, these two broken people who just happen to encounter each other on a rainy night. And he's, obviously attracted to her, but way too shy to do anything about it. And she knows it. And she's being kind of warm and maternal. And he's got this awful mother that he's talking about, just these two lost souls that have drifted together for a moment. It has that feeling. And then it's punctured by Norman's increasing craziness. But it really does get that feeling that you, like, if you're made a new friend and you find that you're both on the same page about a lot of things, like the parlor scene has that kind of like, you meet somebody and your energy's vibing, not in a sexual way, but just in like, we understand each other kind of a way. We both really do feel trapped. We've all had that experience of meeting somebody for the first time and you just click. This is a really nice scene about two people clicking, and he doesn't ruin it in the context of the scene, even though he goes a little crazy, quote unquote. He does. When she walks away from that encounter, she thinks, "Oh, we clicked. That was nice." He's obviously oppressed by his mother. But Anthony Perkins plays it just right. He delivers all those speeches. We're all in our private traps. We scratch and claw, but only at the air. And then when he gets angry at her, if you love somebody, you don't do that to them, even if you hate them. And he gives that big angry speech. Did you know what they do in those places? But she's harmless. And then Marion kind of backs off, and then he kind of smiles and looks at the ground and says, "I've thought about it myself sometimes."
Man.
People always mean well. They cluck their thick tongues and shake their heads and suggest oh so very delicately. Just one of the best dialogue scenes in all of moviedom, I think. It happens to be like have a whole context, a whole story outside of it that's gives it added interest, shall we say. But I really like that scene. And that gets it. And so Marion's like, "Yay, I've decided to do the right thing. I'm going to get out of my trap." And she goes and she makes the decision and she tallies up how much money she's going to owe, the $700 on that stupid, useless car swap that did nothing to get the cop off of her trail or anything. Never made any sense. But she's like, "I'm going to wash myself clean." And she gets in the shower. She has a great shower. She goes back. She gives the money back. It's a beautiful story of redemption and the human spirit triumphing in the face of... she gets stabbed in the shower to death by Mrs. Bates, or by Norman Bates. The big twist. What did you guys think of the shower scene? I mean, it is so iconic. Was it kind of just stripped of, no pun intended, of all power, because it's just like, well, I've seen this on commercials and montages and stuff? Or
no, it's still, what's weird is that it seems to boil down all the fear and the violence into iconography, if that makes it. It's like an abstraction of what would happen, and it feels like a very heavy and I won't say I was scared, but on the other hand, there is something scary about it.
I think you put your finger on it. I think because it makes it an abstraction, it doesn't let you off the hook with, like, if you just see a knife go into flesh, you actually disassociate with, because you start thinking about special effects, you start thinking about the actress's nudity, you start thinking about...
And once you've seen that one time, you've seen it.
Right. It's like,
but
okay.
This taps into an idea, and it portrays an idea that you've never actually wrapped your head around, not really. And so it's like, you could watch it 100 times, and each time...
And I think for that reason, in the same way that we said in The Godfather, the thing that we all kind of agreed was actually most violent was Carlo kicking the window out while he's being garroted, even though you don't see blood. There's something about the idea of struggling against being strangled such that you kick a window out. Like that sticks with us more than some of the bloody stuff. It's just like, it's not all about a knife going into a human flesh. It's about putting your hands out. It's about saying, please, no. It's about, there's humanity that this montage actually manages to capture in her death that your typical horror movie scene downstream of this, it becomes about biology for like, here's what the human body does if you cut it open. But no, this is like the character of Marion Crane pleading for her life, the life running out of her. Like, I find
it leaves so many questions open by what it doesn't show too. Like, I can imagine easily, I mean, I think I may have even had this thought, like, wait a minute. So I know that the shower scene happens, but we still have half a movie left. Like,
is she gonna be okay?
Like, is she, what's next? Yeah, is she gonna, we're gonna see her breathing on the floor? That, like, what? I don't know. Yeah, no,
also, I don't know. It's just it's horrifying. I think it's still horrifying. I hate the fact that the iconography is so overused because it really is taking something pretty powerful, and like, it doesn't need to be the cover of the DVD. It doesn't, and it certainly doesn't need to be in like, hey, remember old Hollywood? They used to do fun things. Here's a scene from Gone with the Wind, and here's Marion Crane getting stabbed to death in the shower. Scene famously 78 cuts, 52 camera setups.
Holy cow.
I didn't realize.
Yeah, no.
That's nuts.
So not 78 like edits, not 78 stab wounds.
I got you. I see what you did there.
Janet Leigh never had to do nudity for the movie. She's always wearing something. Although I think they did bring in a model to do some stuff. It is, we always talk about Hitchcock and the bomb blowing up thing, planting the bomb under the table, telling the audience it's there, then letting them dread it. It is interesting that Hitchcock's by the thing that he's most famous for is iconically not that. It's the bomb. You didn't know the bomb was under the table and now it's going off. Maybe there's a bomb because the movie's called Psycho and something's going to happen. But I think audiences at the time really might have been like, maybe Janet Leigh's the psycho for stealing this money. And then this guy said, we all go mad. This movie's about like people go mad. Like, I don't necessarily know this is what
we're going to follow her descent into madness. And that's been the whole setup. Like, she thinks this cop she's doing the thing. She's like, oh yeah. Like, okay, so what's she going to do?
Yeah. We all go a little mad.
She's going to go back to what's his face, and he's going to reject her, and then she's going to what's she going to do next? Like, yeah,
yeah,
it's fun to think that could have very well been what everybody was thinking.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think you can't go back. You can't put the genie back in the bottle. It's just like you. There's no way to watch this movie the way that it was intended to be watched. Like, nobody doesn't know. If you happen to have somehow missed that that's what happens in the movie, then all you have to do is get out your trusty Blu-ray or pull it up on a streaming service, and chances are they'll choose that image.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's like it's the shower stab movie. That's the thing that happens. And then Hitchcock spends so much time on Norman Bates cleaning up. The sort of film theorists and critics of the time, they love this. It's audacious because it's switch. We're with Marion, and then she's pulled away from us, and so we're looking for somebody to identify with, for somebody to.
And so we feel bad for Norman and hope he gets it all cleaned up perfectly, and
he becomes the audience surrogate for the rest of the movie. And it is a neat trick.
No, get all the blood. Be sure that you get it all washed off your hands to get it all down the drain. Oh, I hope you don't drip it as you put her body into her trunk.
Is he gonna forget the money? Will he forget the money?
Yes.
Isn't the money there on the dresser?
There's the money. It is
don't
funny.
Forget that newspaper.
And it is one of those things where you're just like, don't forget the money. And then you're like, oh, the money.
He's not even going to look at it.
Oh, it's just going to be the money's going to be
flushed down the drain.
All of our resolutions to our story are gone.
Right. And I do feel there is part of me that really doesn't like that. Like I've said numerous times now, like, I know it's the most famous trick in all of cinema, but it's a pretty naughty trick. Like, you really did spend 40 minutes making me invest in this woman and in her thing. And then, I guess it captures the nihilistic horror of murder. Like, that's what a murder does. It cuts somebody's life off and their story's done when it wasn't supposed to be. But narratively, I do feel interrupted. Like, I really do. Like, Marianne's story was interesting. Thanks a lot.
It still goes on. It's Sam and Lila taking up the cause.
All right, let me ask, because we're getting to, and we'll go through the rest of the film pretty quickly, folks, but because there's not that much more to talk about, actually. Vera Mills and Bergast and like that whole story. A, do you guys agree with me that they're boring? B, do you think that that's a feature or a bug?
Arbogast, I like.
Yeah, I like Arbogast too.
Yeah, I like him.
Although I'm squarely in Norman's corner when the two of them face off and Arbogast's like trying to figure it out. Like, I think my sympathy is still with like Norman's being oppressed and this guy keeps asking too many questions and he won't go away. And
I was in Arbogast court. I was like, this guy's obviously a liar with a bad conscience, and Arbogast knows that on some intuitive level.
yeah.
I just enjoyed the conflict of it in that sense.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know. Like, I hate that the movie can make you. I hate that somebody like Hitchcock can make you sympathize with a Norman Bates.
Mm-hmm.
But
we all have our guilty secrets. I mean, we've all been there. Hopefully, most of us haven't been in a swamp waiting for a car to sink with a corpse that we murdered. But we are not incapable of sympathizing with a moment like that.
No, let me cover it up. Stop asking questions.
Stop asking questions. Okay, so what about Sam and Lila? We'll get to Arbogast in a minute. But do you think it's a feature or a bug that they're just as wooden and cardboard and stupid as they are?
I mean, you're making that movie today, and now they're falling in with each other, even in the hotel room.
Which is part of the script. The guy pushed for it. But it does present a little bit of a problem of likability, because if Sam's going to
fall in with the sister
after
while looking for the missing.
Yeah. But you can imagine in another Hitchcock movie, they'd have the kind of witty banter and they'd fall in love. But Hitchcock was just like, nope, anything that's in the script, I'm going to cut. Like, I don't care. The point is to the audience. The audience doesn't care about these characters. They care about the mystery. And so let's get people back to that house as quickly as possible, get to the set pieces. And
I mean, Hitchcock on the one hand is still able to use them as audience avatars, and I felt suspense on their behalf.
yes.
Just fine.
Yeah.
Just fine. And it doesn't matter, even if it is a bug, it feels like a feature.
Yeah.
It doesn't really matter to me. I don't know what he
Yeah,
intended.
it's
You
like
know what
weird.
I mean?
It's like it works.
It works.
It just works. And so you can argue that it might have been better, but it would have been a different movie. And it's sort of like the Luke Skywalker problem.
Mm-hmm.
I feels
which
like that.
isn't a problem,
Yeah.
right? Like at this point, they're just two. There's a guy and a girl, and so you're one of them. Which would you be? And
They know something's up. They're already on to Norman, just like
yeah,
you.
you're in the Horman. You're in the horror movie.
I thought you were going to say
in the Norman's nest.
In the Norman's nest. Yeah.
You're in the horror movie. You're in the situation, and all you need are audience avatars facing up against the primeval horror that lurks around the corner known as Mother.
Yeah, it's like Mina and Jonathan Harker and Dracula. They're so boring, but the interest is in Dracula and in Van Helsing, which this movie's Van Helsing sucks.
And no King Laugh shows up.
Yeah, an old King Laugh shows up. Listen to the Bookendings episode on Dracula, or read the novel Dracula if you want to find out about old King Laugh. So, yeah, I don't know. Let's see. There's the Arbogast murder. Arguably, for people watching it today, a more fun sequence than the shower sequence, because we all know that's coming. But watching Arbogast creep through the house, and then, like you were saying earlier, Jake, just
She comes flying out of the bedroom up from the top-down shot.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Which the reason they did that was because Hitchcock was like, if we have to choose our camera angles really carefully, because we don't want to feel like we're cutting away from anything. We want to feel like it's incidental that you don't see Mother's face. We don't want to feel like we're hiding it.
Yep.
So just doing this God's eye view kind of thing will feel pretty inevitable and pretty natural in that scene. And then you have that wonderful stumble down the stairs, which is actually the actor in front of a projection or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And the death of poor Arbogast. I will say, in terms of just horror movie creeps, the Bates house is a pretty
amazing.
The mise en scene, the prop, the story this tells of this poor boy stuck in this Victorian nightmare world of depravity, like the little things in the background, the toys,
especially when
His
she
room?
goes walking through.
Yeah, especially
when she goes walking through. Yeah, it's horrifying.
Yeah.
It's
his room,
horrifying.
that little bed.
Well, and again,
The toy rabbit missing its ear.
yeah,
Just all kinds of things.
that's the kind of thing that gets under my skin. Is like, what
happened?
What was his life actually like?
Absolutely.
It's and again, I have a friend and I'm picturing a house, and I went and slept over there when I was a kid, and That's what it was. The collection of relics, the dark space in the basement where you dare not go, and the toys and the decrepitude and the old Victorian of it all, and the kind of just that ugly, nasty psychic weight that a place can accrue when bad people are living there. This movie really channels that really well in a way that's not really gothic or over the top. Like I think it just feels like how Norman and Norma's house would feel.
I think so. Oh, I was going to say something else about his performance, which is after he sends Arbogast off the first time, he smiles.
Yeah.
He smiles, and it's like, what I feel like it is it doesn't matter what happens now, but there's a good chance we can feed Mother.
Yeah.
That's how I feel.
Arbogast is already toast
Yeah,
there.
yeah. Something like that.
Well, and I love Hitchcock's restraint in that once he's shown you one murder and one body disposal, all we need is one shot of Norman standing by the swamp after Arbogast gets it to tell you everything that happens. Yeah, so we got the Arbogast set piece, we got the Lila set piece, the famous revelation. Filmmaking is good. Like it's not just we've got a story beat, we got to reveal the mother, but how are we going to do it? Let's make that corpse look like it's alive. How are we going to do that? Well, let's have the woman's hand bat the bulb so it can swing back and forth and the light can be playing on the sockets of the eyes, and it's all visual. It's all, I mean, I know I'm saying an obvious thing, but I think it's the kind of thing you don't think about when you watch a movie. Like Hitchcock had to figure out a way to visualize this and make it scary. And he did. And then
Success.
Yeah, success. Good job. And then Norman comes running out, and if you can't tell what he actually screams, "I'm Norma Bates."
I missed that.
I did too. I only read it looking at movie quotes.
I discovered it because I had the subtitles on, as I usually do these days. But yeah, it's a great little scene. And then he makes that really weird face as Sam.
It's amazing.
Yeah, it's like, what's even going on with this guy? I mean, it is a bit of madness acting, but we've saved it until that moment, and it's good madness acting. And then we have the famous scene that Roger Ebert said is an anticlimax taken almost to the point of parody. The ridiculous, or is it, psychiatrist scene. Lila says, "Did he kill my sister?" And the psychiatrist says, "Yes and no."
He's such a doofus.
I like your take, Ben.
What was my take?
Was it your take?
I don't know. What's the take?
I think we already said it.
Yeah.
Maybe we said it.
We said it early.
Yeah,
whatever it was.
But it was, oh shoot. Help me.
It was a great take.
Right. It was like he gave the audience, well, Nathan started saying it too, but I forget who said what. He gave the audience permission to push it aside like it's been explained, and we're not Norman.
But he made the expert glib and complacent and stupid in order to say, yeah, if you're an idiot that needs an explanation,
oh yeah,
here it is.
Here it is. Take it, sucker.
But
that's not the final word, actually.
Right.
The final word is staring
into the face of madness itself. This man trapped somewhere far in the recesses of his mind while Mother controls everything. There was a review I read that said, in terms of cosmic alienation, there's two great movies, and one is the guy finding himself in the house at the end of 2001, and the other is the last shot of Norman Bates. And I think that's a canny, or perhaps uncanny, comparison. That kind of feeling of alienation that's evoked in both cases. A guy just trapped somewhere.
Yeah,
pretty spooky stuff. And then you guys catch the little famous subliminal edit, or maybe not so subliminal edit. Mother's face appears.
No,
it's really quick. You have to almost pause it, but you actually see the corpse face of Mother appears over Norman as we cut from Norman to the end of Marion Crane's story as the car is pulled out of the mud.
I might have caught that.
They'll see and they'll know. They'll say, why she wouldn't even hurt a fly. Wonderful last line. Okay, final big question. Our culture has lost its sense of sexual deviancy as being anything deviant. This movie is actually pretty politically incorrect in saying that a transvestite, weirdo, sexually deviant dude would also be a murderer.
The psychiatrist, well, yeah, it is in that sense. But the psychiatrist even whitewashes Because you've got the detective or whoever in the room saying,
So is he a transvestite?
no, let's explain it away.
A transvestite dresses up to achieve a kind of
Sexual gratification, but this was different.
Right.
Yeah.
So the thing that people always say is that horror movies are essentially conservative, that it is an essentially conservative genre because it is saying play with sex, die. I mean, that's the basic theme of, I'd say 60 to 70% of all horror movies, if not more. Cross the threshold into bad behavior, deviate from being a good girl.
Pay for it.
We could say what we don't have to say Norman's direct karma or anything like that. But the fact is, this woman was messing around with things she shouldn't have messed around with. She was using her sexuality in a way she shouldn't have, and she died. And she died because of a broken sexual deviant man who was hurt in some way that children should never be hurt. So basically, twisting God's design for sex rots and kills you, and rots and kills other people too, which is a very conservative point of view. So do you guys think that a movie like this actually does uphold a value like that, a value that we would agree with? Or do you think that it doesn't? And why or why not? I don't know that I even have an answer for this question. I just think it's a question worth answering or asking at least.
I think superficially they do, but ultimately they're transgressive.
Mm-hmm.
And I think they're transgressive in the same way that the old school operas are transgressive, where they exist. Like if you watch a Mozart opera, they exist to allow you into the decadent world of Don Giovanni, and then to have some catharsis at the end when he gets dragged off by the demons into hell.
Mm-hmm.
And so it, as a coping mechanism for the sexual deviance in your own heart, that allows you to revel in it for a certain percentage of the movie and then get some catharsis that's exculpatory, lets you off the hook so that you can go back to it or continue down a progression in real life. I think it ultimately can be a stepping stone into deeper deviancy for that reason. So I don't think, on a superficial level, I think that's true, but on an ultimate level, I think, no, this is all part of the twisted, perverse process of because you have to, if you're going to give yourself over to sexual deviancy, you have to find ways to cope. You have to find ways out. You have to find ways to deal with it. And this genre ultimately becomes that, or becomes so interconnected with it that, I mean, I think they tend to feed off of each other.
Yeah.
And that's why that's why Halloween can be such a perverse, sexually debauched time of year is, and why many of the people you find most into it, are the woman who wants to use it as an excuse to dress to be more modest than she normally would, to have an excuse for that sort of thing.
But if you're going to go to a party and flaunt your immodesty, it's actually nice to go to a party where someone else is going to be dressed up in such a way that reminds you, you're going to die.
Yeah.
You actually want both things.
I think you want both. And I think that the other provides counterbalance to the tension you feel about your own.
Right.
And it gives you permission to go that much farther. If I've looked into the face that this is going to cause me to die, then I don't feel as bad about going there.
Yeah.
I feel like I've dealt with it or coped, or I feel like it's been dealt with. I feel like I've had some kind of,
I've paid my price.
I've paid the price. I've had some release cathartically that gives vent to the deep understanding that I have that I will be judged for this.
Yeah, I think that's true. I mean, I think the nature of catharsis is a complicated thing because obviously none of us are against it, or we would never watch against it writ large as a thing ever, because otherwise we wouldn't watch Star Wars. We wouldn't like stories.
That's right.
Yeah, I think even a dark story like this, fairy tales that say there's a big bad wolf and sometimes he eats people, they can be good. I think a little bit of a reminder is good. I think some of it is diet. If your diet is just Halloween movies and Psycho and everything, you got some splaining to do. I don't know that this movie in and of itself, I think, is necessarily evil for everyone to watch. But yeah, I agree with you. People do want catharsis. I will say I miss the days when Hollywood was smart enough to know this, that they needed counterbalance. Like these days, a lot of horror movies just want to say, yeah, it's pretty great to be Norman Bates, actually. And that's a really dumb point of view, because that's actually not very satisfying even to the little budding Norman Bates that watch the movie. It's more satisfying to say you can't get away with Norman Bates. So we are actually so immoral that we just write Don Giovanni without the ending now. And I think there's something aimless, amiss, and terrible about that in its own way, without wanting to excuse the trick that the Don Giovannis of the world have played on their. It's like we always say, hypocrisy is what is it?
Tribute device pays to virtue.
Tribute that,
Yeah. And I think I agree with what Jake said. And I just go back to the conversation we had earlier, maybe the beginning of this podcast, about being given permission to be immoral, like through reading true crime novels, you know, but also condemn immorality and distance yourself from it, but also enjoy it. But also, like, I think of horror movies as being for that, especially.
Yeah. Well, I just think these days people don't feel like they need permission, and that's even worse. Like now Hannibal Lecter has his own TV show, and he's just the hero of the TV show.
So did Norman Bates for a while.
Exactly. That's a better example. They made a show called Bates Motel. It's about Norman and Norma and how they come to the hotel, and it's like, at least this movie does us the service of pretending like it's about Barry and Crane, and pretending like it's about Sam and Lila, as lame as they are. I'm not really defending it. I'm just saying there is something to that, that they are paying a tribute to virtue there. And like I said, at some point in this 9-hour podcast, I'm glad that Hitchcock was alive in a time and a place where he had to pay a lot of tributes to virtue, because I think he would have just been a very
an actual censor board that he had to.
Yeah, as much as he was gleefully defying them, at least there was something that he had to gleefully defy. And I think he made better movies for it, and movies that have lasted longer and had more cultural impact because of that. Like, if he was just allowed to, every year, lots of violent slasher movies come and go, but Psycho is probably going to be remembered for a long time. And it's precisely because of the things he couldn't do, the things he couldn't show, the lines he couldn't cross, that we remember it at all. All right, Ben, how many shower heads out of 9,000 do you give to Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho?
On a level of like quality and stuff, probably 8,500. On a level of like, everyone should see this movie, like 6,500 or something.
All right, there we go. So we're split the difference. Ben gave it about 75,000.
Sure.
Yeah,
7,500.
7,500
like
shower heads. Jake, same question.
We did about 8,000.
8,000 across the board.
Yeah, I mean, we're gonna do at the end of the year, we're gonna rate every movie that we've seen, and this is a movie that keeps jumping into my top 10 and falling out of my top 25. Like,
yeah,
it's going to be in there. It's going to be in the top 25. Whether or not it'll be in the top 10 or somewhere near the bottom, I'm not even sure what all the factors will be, but it does jump around depending on how I feel or what my overruling metric is. If it's just craft, then it's going to be top 10.
Right. Yeah, in terms of craftsmanship, this movie's right up there with anything we've ever watched on the podcast.
Yeah.
In terms of a coherent existential point of view, I'd say this movie's pretty high. I mean, it is. Yeah. It does put you in a world, and it is true to that world in a way that's really powerful. Whether that's a world that we need to spend much time in is another question, and that's why none of us is going to give it a full 9,000 shower heads. But it is a compelling piece of cinema. There are things that are very haunting about it. The character of Norman Bates, as played by Anthony Perkins, is iconic for a reason and an indelible part of cinema. And yeah. And I think that there are scenes in this movie that, like the parlor scene, that I think are just so superlative. We didn't say about the parlor scene, the way it's decorated with all those stupid birds of prey closing in on Norman, and B, just if you want to see a simple example of how cutting and staging and camera placement matters, watch how the camera closes in on Norman as he goes crazier and crazier during that scene. And at a certain point, like, it's looking at him full on, so you don't have a bunch of birds. Oh, and then about halfway through the scene, when the switch kind of flips in terms of Norman's psychosis, we suddenly are looking at him from the side for the whole rest of the scene, and there are all these massive birds of prey filling the frame, coming down on him. And it's just about as overtly symbolic, psychological, Freudian as you could get, but it's really beautiful. It's just so simple and yet you know, like the camera's not doing anything fancy. It's just like kind of medium shots of these two characters. But when Hitchcock switches to the medium shot that includes that particular detail of the room, really smart and interesting and fun to watch. This movie has a lot of things like that. They're just fun to watch if you like cinema. So that's Psycho. I'll give it one shower head. I think we shouldn't have even talked about it. You guys are gross for giving it more than one shower head. Didn't care for the picture. Don't care for this kind of thing at all. But yeah, I'll tell you what I do care about deeply is our patron choice of awesomeness, our patron choice award of awesomeness winner, Jay. What makes Jay so great, fellas?
Jay would never open up a hotel in the middle of nowhere, kill its occupants while cross-dressing.
I dare say, in the list of things that Jay would do, right near the bottom. Right near the bottom.
Close to it.
Close to the bottom. Motel, by the way, if you please. I think we've said those things interchangeably. I know I have.
Did I just say hotel?
Guys, go to our patreon.com/sanity at the movies. Did you say motel?
No, I don't know. I was laughing because that was it for Jay.
Oh, yeah. No, Jay's great. I'll tell you what he would do. There's other things he would do. He wouldn't steal $40,000. He would give it back. If an old lady tried to stab him in the shower, he'd punch her in the nose and emerge victorious from that scuffle, I dare say. If somebody tried to kill a lady he was with, he'd wrestle him to the ground and stop it from happening. And if he had to explain someone's psychosis, he'd do it in a very non-glib, serious, like caring manner.
I think those are all true things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know what would happen if a man dressed as a woman tried to stab him in the shower, but I do know if an old lady actually tried to stab him in the shower, I think he could.
He could handle it.
He could handle it. Yeah. Even if she had a knife and he didn't, he'd grab like a loofah and use it
take the shower bar and
take the shower bar. No, I think he just beats her down with a loofah. Patreon.com, we have a Discord set up. We forgot to mention this at the top of the show, but we've got a Discord. We're really excited about it. You want to talk movies with us?
You can talk about any of the movies that we are going to watch or ask questions or have things that you'd like us to address about those movies. If you want to suggest movies, if you want to talk about anything that you've seen in theaters or recently at home, if you want to talk about things we've said in an episode about a movie.
Yeah, maybe you're like, why are you guys being so hard on Norman Bates? He's my homie. I like this guy.
Yeah, you could go into our Psycho thread and take issue with the way that we've dealt with Norman Bates.
Sure.
Yeah. Whatever you want to do, or what's another movie we've done recently? I guess we did The Godfather. We kind of saved our controversial picks until the end of this year, didn't we? You say gangsters are great. Who doesn't love Italian-American gangsters?
What are you, a racist?
What are you, a racist? Yeah. You can do that. So that's going to be fun. We have another Patreon thing that we're coming up with that I can't tell you yet that I'm really excited about that you'll want to sign up for.
Oh, man, that's going to be really cool.
Yeah, it's going to be super great. So you want to be part of our Patreon. I tell you.
I think it's the most exciting Patreon thing maybe that we've done, at least for me personally.
Yeah, I'm excited about it too. I say the same thing.
Yeah, agreed.
Right up there with the Bookening Patreon level where you get a signed book, I say. And it's not, we're not sending you signed DVDs or anything like that, folks.
No,
but
this is better than that.
It's better than that. But yeah, it's going to be great. I'm really excited and you should be too. We all go a little mad sometimes. It's a thing that this movie's taught us. So sorry, folks. I thought my scream of consciousness was going somewhere, my Halloween scream of consciousness, but it didn't. It just petered out. But this episode is not just as long as the movie. This episode is way longer than the movie, okay? You got a lot of talk about Psycho. More than you deserved. For free. You don't have to go to the Patreon. You got it for free. So stop whining. I'm sorry my scream of consciousness ran out. It doesn't happen that often. It happens every once in a while. Sometimes I cut it out so you'll think I'm smart. But I'm leaving it in this time because there's no way I'm sorting through 9 hours of Psycho to take it out. So anyway, folks, I wish you happy times. Oh, one other thing I wanted to say. I think this is a great California movie. It really plays to the myth that losers, loners, dreamers, and psychopaths somehow find themselves in the magical state of California. So there's a reason Bates Motel is not in, where is she? Arizona. It's in California. You got to cross into California to find a Norman Bates. We all know that. All right. Until next time.
We all go a little mad sometimes.
Yes, we do. Especially when this music has more time to finish. I guess you get a little bit more scream of consciousness. Consciousness. Norman Bates was conscious. Bye.